Good day. Hello. Thank you for joining Teamwork Criminal May experience. Saddle up because it's going to be long, interesting, very complex, and I have to start with three mea culpas. First of all, I want to make a mea culpa over the lack of trust in Russians making finally something opportunistic and predatory on the border. I had replied and I said that an operation towards Kharkov would need a second army, quote unquote, because I was blinded by the necessity to take the city. However, we are clearly seeing there is no necessity to take the city in order to achieve a strategic goal, which is stretching the Ukrainians thin both on material and in men over the front, while at the same time not actually having a longer front for the Russians. I'm going to make the calculus on the map, but basically the current fighting is piggybacking on a technical shortening of the front between January and May 2024 of about 62 kilometers. And right now, the front opening between basically Kozachilopan and the easternmost point is 58 kilometers. So actually, the front, if we want to be just bean counters, is not longer. This is a technicality, of course, but this is the first part. Of course, it's a different game because now you're attacking on a completely different direction than from Donetsk and from Zaporozhye. So it opens a third logistical effort. But the advantage, of course, is that you are just attacking from Russian territory immediately and not within Ukraine, which makes it a bit more complicated because you need to establish logistical centers, dumps, and so forth. I also want to make the apology because, as I said, I wasn't having the Russians being able or being cut for a opportunistic and predatory action because that's what exactly the current attack on Kharkov is. It's not very wide. As I said, we're looking at maximum 60 kilometers of length. It's not very powerful either, but it's having a lot of success for the limited cost. So from everything that we're seeing, we're looking at maybe 5 to 10,000 people that would take part totally in this offensive. And for that effort so far within 7 days, we are having a substantial progress. Most of it because, and this has been said by numerous Ukrainian sources with whom I don't agree, because simply the Ukrainians ran out. They weren't able to muster a proper defensive posture, and also apparently they weren't expecting an assault, despite everything that's been said. Right now, only on tape alone, we have about 60 prisoners of war, which is the whole company gone for the Ukrainians. There are Russian losses, there are Ukrainian losses, and I'm going to speak about them a bit later on. I'm going to explain why suddenly the Russians, who have such a huge problem and bother on taking out assets on established fronts, seemingly have no problem taking both strategic assets and tactical assets, especially air defense. We've seen at least 2 to 3 Franken SAMs taken out. We've seen uh, at least 2 short-range missile systems, and we're seeing a lot of multiple rocket launchers taken out in 7 days. If we start to establish numbers, honestly, this looks a lot like the losses that Ukraine, artillery-wise, proven artillery-wise, was racking up at the initial invasion. This, of course, for people who are following the subject, is not absolutely true because they have been losing a lot of assets these last times, which is the main cause for concern for Ukrainians. but they do not dare to talk about it because they understand that, unfortunately for them, the allies that they have never considered artillery as a cornerstone of their strategy. The Americans maybe can have nice artillery, rocket artillery, tube artillery, but in reality, the Americans had procured for themselves less artillery pieces than the Russians have lost, as proven. So the logic there, the concept there is completely different. If the US loses the same amount of artillery that Ukraine has been losing, they would be without any single tube by now. Of course, this is swapped for Americans and Europeans generally to the Air Force, who is supposed to make the bigger dent with long-range precision fires and so on. But that, of course, is not possible for Ukraine right now because first, they don't have the planes in sufficient numbers. Second, they don't have the assets in sufficient numbers. And third, they are way too busy of striking within Ukraine, although that might change in the future, to actually make a dent in the general logistics of the Russian army outside of the internationally still recognized territory of the 404 policy. So now let's go to the actual heart of the argument. The heart of the argument actually is pretty simple. Um, we were expecting uh, a further push in the Donetsk and in Zaporozhye area. This has been ongoing. As I said, Robotyne is clear of Pigers right now. They are already outside of the village. Unfortunately, Russians cannot occupy the whole locality because it's flat, it's unprotected, and it's going to be a ongoing uh, propaganda battle. So even if the Russians tomorrow, even today, point a flag at the extremity of the hamlet, they're gonna be FPV'd, and you know, it's for me, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the geolocated positions of attack from the Russian side towards the Ukrainian positions are already about a kilometer outside of the village. But as I said, the contactless way of fight that both sides have been embracing makes it impossible to actually claim anything, even if it's literally true. As I said, Stepoev was empty of Pigers for over 2 months and a half. It didn't mean that the Russians could fully occupy it, and unfortunately, that's also the technical explanation of a occupation. Robotyne is already done. Verbovoye is completely cleared over 800, 900 meters. So we are not in that situation in late August, early September, where Pigers could literally valse from trench to trench and approach towards Verbovoye. And also, most importantly, a couple of other movements have been seen around Mikilske for Ugledar. I would rather, as I said previously, expect the Ugledar axis to become ugly for Ukrainians by the takeover of Krasnogorivka and advancements towards Kurakovo. But, the Russians will always try and probe in Ugledar for obvious reasons. It has been a thorn in the whole layout on southern Donetsk. So for sure, they will always try something, although it might look completely crazy. But the most important advancements are not there. Of course, they are on the now so-called Pokrovsk axis from the Ukrainians. Krasnogorivka, very important. Netalove, very important. The Kalivka reservoir is already a choke point. We've seen at least 8 tanks destroyed in the area, with at least 4 tanks literally at the choke point of the reservoir, one T-80 BV and a couple of T-72s. So we are going towards what I said, which is the Russians are going to interdict the area, going to go towards progress. Once they're towards progress, if they got progress, they have the higher ground. They're going to get Jelane. Once they got Jelane, then it's basically, for everybody who understands what Jelane means for the area, it's game over for the traffic between Pokrovsk, and Konstantinovka. Konstantinovka is locked in three axes, and any kind of um, reinforcements or resupply would have to come with a threat towards Chasiv Yar, or soon to be Chasov Yar. And basically, it's going to be a long agony for the city, akin to what Bahmut was once Soledar was taken. And overall, if you neutralize Pokrovsk as a staging point, as I said, and if you neutralize Konstantinovka by taking out Chasov Yar, well, then you might pick and choose which destinations you have to pursue next. I would say just go with Konstantinovka. Is in the lower ground, is a big enough city, over 70,000 people, and it would literally crush everything that you're having for propaganda on the Ukrainian side. The biggest trouble with Konstantinovka is because it's in a lower, situated very low, it will be a hell of a battle to actually first occupy it, control it, but also keep your troops out of harm's way, because you are going to descend in the valley to take the city, and you are going to get smashed by the higher ground from the west where the Pigers are going to sit. So on that aspect, to take Konstantinovka, Chasov Yar needs to be taken, and you need to take the heights over the north of Konstantinovka, which would start threatening westwards, and would also allow the Russians to be able to fire into the deeper from the northwest, so from Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, rather than just occupy the immediate eastwards border from Chasov Yar and just attack the city. In my opinion, I've discussed this with multiple persons. I think that Konstantinovka will be choked first instead of occupied, uh, because it's just too easy to bleed the Pigers in the city. First of all, it's a big city, as I said, relatively big city. But second of all, the most important part is that it's a direct connection and a integral part of the sister city network, as I saw. So Konstantinovka, Dushkovka, Slovyansk, and Kramatorsk, or inversely Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. So once one of the four sister cities fall, although Dushkovka is not that big, it's a mix of agglomerations. Uh, you have the Russians within 10 kilometers of this continuum, which means that once they choke it, take it, and move forward, a bit like happened with Ocheretyne, you're going to have a oil versus water situation where, as you know, oil will expand and will not mix with water. So we'll start taking over Drushkovka, the surrounding elements of Drushkovka, and start getting the higher grounds. Once they have that, then you have a problem how you defend Kramatorsk. Once you have a problem defending Kramatorsk, you need to think about Slovyansk, because from the north, Slovyansk is still at risk. Although, as I said, bridges are off, defensive positions a lot better, north of Slovyansk and so on. But we've seen that for the Russians, a lot of things just don't matter. We saw how Ocheretyne went, and we are seeing the large problems that Ocheretyne is causing to the Avdiivka area, simply because it's keeping the higher ground. Then, of course, right now the Russians have so much more options in the area. I said the logic would be to go towards Berezivka to cut the highway, but you could also now, given how the Russians are advancing, take over Progress and Zelane, and then you don't even need to cut the highway at Berezivka. The only thing that you need to do is just take over Zelane and Progress, and then you cut the complete nodule. And Pokrovsk is a lot closer than cutting at Berezivka. Of course, the biggest problem right now is not what and who you are going to isolate or cut or whatever. The biggest problem is how you're going to do it without overstretching yourself, especially in the view of the current operations in the Kharkov area. My opinion from what we're seeing is that the Russians are still going to pursue all three of them. I already made a smallish kind of thread by saying that Chasov Yar looks a lot more problematic than Kharkov, and it's going to establish a precedent uh, in how the Ukrainians are going to treat anything from now on. Because that's the biggest problem we have now with Ukrainians. We were expecting Chasiv to be a lot more contested, and I'm taking into account what happened with Solidar. Solidar resisted for 4 months before the defensive system broke down. With Chasiv in Novi and the Canal district, they lasted 3 weeks. And of course, why is that? That's a valid question. Like, of course, that the fact that they were battered all over the line for so long in fruitless counter attacks on Ivanivske and trying to hold Klishivka and the Klishivka and Rivka axis against all odds and all reason. Of course, that's a problem, but this is not where we are at. We are not speaking about this. We are speaking about two main problems here. The main problem is that, first of all, okay, manpower and equipment shortage, but the second problem is how bad the general answer has been from the Ukrainian side. And when I say bad, it's extremely bad. We can say Syrskyi, Moscow agent, whatever you want, but actually, I do not think that Syrskyi has made any single mistake uh, when you analyze what Zaluzhny used to do in these cases. A lot of people are giving shit to Syrskyi, sorry guys, for stuff that Zaluzhny would do even worse. Zalupitska is the guy who literally threw shit in Robotina for 2 months, who humiliated a huge part of the Western military industrial complex. And then suddenly Syrskyi is the bad guy. No, 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 no. It doesn't work like that, guys. We need to accept and to understand two main problems here. The two main problems are the Ukrainian forces have been fighting this underdog battle for two and some years. The counter was supposed to be their coming of age and having them be both more proactive in their own strategy, but most importantly, beyond the proactivity and whatever, they were supposed to be a lot stronger and with a lot more tools. We have spoken about the Krapivka, there is the combat and battlefield management system. They are supposed to be a lot more inventive, and they can coordinate better, and they can use Starlink, and they can have access to American intelligence. All this shit. Where did all this stuff go? Remember that when they did this in Kharkov, it took literally 19 days to completely finish that joke of a story, and then they started to grind into Russian defenses post mobilization, and then it got fucked. And when I say fact, they literally lost a huge chunk of troops they should have never lost for the result they got. Because, first of all, they're not Russia, but second of all the things that we're doing, they were just sinking. You have to imagine this swamp, and you think that you're advancing, but the only thing you're doing, you're sinking. And the Russians had the same situation back in June, July 2022, where indeed they were advancing, but they were sinking a lot of cost there, and they were not paying attention for Kharkov. And as I said, mostly because they thought, or they coped, that it wouldn't matter because Kharkov was still so close that they could come back at any day. Ironically, maybe they were right, given what they're doing right now. Maybe, but at the time and for everyone concerned, it looked like a huge mistake, which cost a large swath of territory, and also might have misled the Ukrainians into believing they could fight and win against Russia. But that's something else. It's not for this space. Um, and I do not believe that, by the way. I do not believe at all that the Kharkov pullout was some kind of a organized fight. No, it was simply the Russians getting caught with the pants down and not reacting fast enough, and all the rest is history. But what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and what we're seeing right now on the Ukrainian side is just the same. They were caught with their pants down because they weren't thinking that the Russians would go, as I said, for this predatory action with a low level of troops between 5 to 10,000. and a low mechanization component, because compared to what they have thrown to villages like Novomegaylovka or smaller cities like Avdiivka, you can clearly see that the Russians are going through there with infantry, lighter vehicles, and a couple of mechanized troops, which gets us to the following point. What's going on in Kharkov? Well, it's very simple. Right now, as I said, the Russians sensed a weakness. They had been bombarding the area for a long time. Most of the area bombarded was on the western bank of the Stary Saltov Canal and Pond Lake, call it whatever you want. Um, and this was, in my opinion, to induce the Ukrainians into the sense that they would attack mainly on the Kazachilopan Lipsy area and take the E105 road straight to the E40. So basically, the same invasion road they took. That road, as I said, is probably the most fortified, mined, and dangerous for the Russians, although it's the fastest. Because it's flanked on both sides by small hamlets where the Russians would get picked off by, basically almost everything. A fuck up might happen with just a couple of Ukrainians assholes with some mines, FPVs, RPGs, ATGMs. What the Russians are doing is literally, and this is the most hilarious part, is a small rerun of what the Azeris did to the Armenians in Karabakh, where once that they had these huge problems with the mechanized troops, you may remember the first 5 days, Azeri mechanized troops had it extremely complicated to break through. They lost T-90s, they lost T-72s Aslan. They advanced, but that's because the suppression came from the sky and artillery as well. In this case, the Russians, in some capacity, are doing the same with infantry just infiltrating towards roads. Um, Little mechanization is used. A big part of it was tapped from the get go, either at the border or not so deep within Ukraine, between 1 and 3 kilometers. I've seen also a bit further at 5, but that remains to be seen if it's Russian or not. But generally, what's going on is Russian artillery covering light motorized infantry or lightly mechanized infantry towards Ukraine's prepared positions, trenches, defensive positions, because Ukrainians cannot stop one, the artillery, two, the Lancet threat, and three, and that's the most important part, the UMPK. The UMPK is becoming, for the Ukrainians, their bane. It's the doom bringer. And I would like a proper mapping of the UMPK strikes, and you're gonna see what the UMPKs have been doing in Kharkov area for now 3 to 5 months, is literally taking out every single position that might have been used back in 2022, 2023 to coordinate, reinforce, harbor weapons, equipment, and so on. I'm dead sure that that's why is allowing the Russians to be not that bold, because we're still speaking about 10 kilometers of penetration, but at least not having that problem they had before by pushing the troops on foot. This, of course, exposes them a lot more, and that's the whole point. By spreading the infantry sources, you make them undesirable to hit by larger systems, so they penetrate deep enough, and suddenly the Ukrainians realize that they're fucked, so they start putting way too many assets in the same small area in order to repel them. So that's why we're seeing like at least the eighth multiple rocket launcher getting taken out, 7 or 8 SPGs getting taken out, um, probably, as I said, 7 or 8 air defense systems also being taken out. We're assisting into a complete depletion of the quick reaction forces that Ukrainians had prepared for the Russians. Is that normal for the Ukrainians? Surely not. They are trying to hide their assets as hell in Zaporozhye, in Donetsk. They don't succeed mostly, but here everything's out in the open and it's blowing. You got grads starting Roman candles. You got racks going up. You got Frank and Sam's blowing up. The situation, as we see, is critical for them. Is a huge problem, and they know it. And therefore, we come with the following statements by the Ukrainians are retreating to more favorable positions. Something that we've heard from the Russian Ministry of Defense back in 2022. But the most important part here, as I said, is why? What literally happened for the Russians to start this operation? A lot of people are saying this is happening because the Russians want to use this capability gap, this ammo gap that I had described in October and September 2023. Actually, I described it a lot earlier when everybody was trying to convince me that the Europeans, within a year, they would produce 2.5 million rounds. I remember the Cameron British retards even making up bullshit stories about how the British were going to multiply by 8 their production, stuff like this. But this capability gap, the fact that they don't have the assets or the ammunition to fire, is true, but the reality is a lot more simple. And just take into account, as we said, what the Russians are doing with the UMPKs. They are blowing about 1,000 UMPKs as a minimum per month. How do I know this? I already told you with pictures of pristine UMPK kits. Bomb had been going off, but the kits was still in 1 or 2 pieces. You could see the production stickers on the system. One of them was for January 2024, and it was labeled 800. The other was for February 2024, and it was labeled 1100. And then we have also found out UMPKs from 2023 within the 2 first months of the year 2024, whereas we would find out some other production numbers, but finding November produced UMPKs fired end of January 2024, that would mean that there wasn't extra capability that wasn't used. So by putting everything together, you could calculate more or less at least 1,000 kits, UMPK kits used per month. Ukrainians are saying 3,000 and this and that. I tend to completely have a disbelief of those huge numbers per month, mostly because the effect would have been a lot more catastrophic. Let's say it like this. But let's say that 1,000 bombs are dropped per month. As I said, you only need to kill one person with a UMPK to make them successful and efficient. And I'm going to explain you why. If we go, this is simply thematic. It's just a hypothetical calculus, but it shows the level of efficiency that you can obtain with a UMPK. You drop that bomb from 70 kilometers or short of 60 kilometers, and you take out one guy and wound 2 others. And mostly your pallets are safe. Well, if you have dropped in 4.5 months 4,500 bombs, and you've killed one guy per bomb as the minimum. I'm not saying some maxi bingos and some very definitive destruction of equipment storages, ammunition storage. I'm just saying kill one guy. That means that for one UMPK, as I said, you're going to kill one, wound 2, and this is the bare minimum. You are looking at 3 casualties per UMPK. Multiply 3 by 4,000, 12,000 casualties. And it's just 20 fucking planes. 25 planes flying. This is how disproportionate the UMPK threat is for the Ukrainians. Now let's go up to that. Instead of counting 1, let's count 5. And again, 4,000 UMPKs, not even 4,500, just 4,000 to make it easy. 5 killed, 10 wounded. You're getting how much? You're getting 20,000 killed and 40,000 wounded. That's 60,000 casualties. Just with some dumb bombs and $1,800 worth of electronics and about 300 worth of aluminum kits. Please tell me how you stop this. We know this is what's going on in El Belbek. That's what was tried in Jankoy. That's what is being tried in Morozovsk. That's what was tried in Taganrog and so on. You need to take out the planes. And it's true that sometimes it happens. There was a Su-34 that was lost within the Russian territory, friendly fire, bigger attack. Anything can happen, but just calculate this. That was the first confirmed Su-34 kill this year. 4.5 months in the conflict. That shit, according to Fighter Bomber, was one of the best, if not the best crew. And we saw the stars he had put in there for the every time the 10 bombing rounds. That thing had dropped 400 sorties at 2 or 4 MPKs, 1,600 bombs. Of course, since they started, so since 2023. But it shows you how much the Air Force is impacting the battlefield and how much the Air Force has been impacting the Kharkov area, because there was no response. The only response the Ukrainians could do is basically terror bomb Belgorod and try to take out with their own assets specific points, small positions of the Russian army, FPVs hitting buses and killing civilians. And of course, this is something else that has completely changed in the Ukrainian mind. They tried not to do that for a while because they felt that they would lose critical support if they did it, except for high-profile cases like murder of Dugina, murder of Fomin, attack on the bridge twice, and so on and so on. However, now they do not have that problem anymore. Now the whole point for Ukrainians has been to inflict pain to the Russians. And on a certain sense, the refinery attacks, the electricity attacks, whereas they may have a logic, still remain terror bombings. And of course, we can adopt the same moniker for the Russians. I don't care. We are team war criminal. I've always said you will have to go after the population. It's the only way to ply them. But you shouldn't be going only after the population, because it's wasting your assets. And that's what's happening here. Everybody's like, yeah, we cannot strike within Russia with American weapons. I was like, why do you need them? The staging points are mostly between 5 and 10 kilometers from the border. You have enough shitty Slovak long-range grads. You have your own Vilka. Hell, you can even use your shitty drones that you're flung 700 kilometers away to take out refineries, for which the Russians have already found an answer. You are losing and wasting assets to cause inconvenience to the Russians, whereas they are causing fucking calamity on you. And it is not by allowing them to strike within Russia with Atacams. It doesn't fucking matter. Yes, you're gonna do it, and yes, you're gonna have 1 or 2 lucky strikes. Then what? They are going to do something that I've stopped doing for a while now, since actually 2023. They're gonna go after your civilian populations. And trust me, guys, I have ideas, and probably the Russians have even more ideas on how to make life shitty. Nikolaev is the perfect logic of it, the perfect example. in 2022. That city straight up was going to become a fucking open air prison camp. They were literally picking water from the sea. They were having bread lines and shit like that. So it's not even like problematic how much the Russians can make it worse for the Ukrainian local population. The point is why the Ukrainians are insisting on a strategy that will literally cause more harm to their purpose than anything else. And this, of course, is logical and normal to understand. They are doing this because they are expecting a worsening of the front, a worsening of their humanitarian situation that would compel at least a couple of Western players to intervene. There is nothing else. Militarily, even if you give them 100 F-16s, they will not be able to reach the targets they're supposed to reach. They have enough shit to deal with within Ukraine. And you can see what's going on with Crimea. They have this motherfucking strategic mental fucking issue, which is being half a century behind the fucking purpose. They keep attacking Crimea like they would, like it would allow them to execute some kind of daring operation, some D-Day, but they have nothing. They do not have landing ships. They do not have the capacity to navigate under the radar. Last time they did this in the Tamanska Spit, they got spit roasted. And look at Krinky. For all the damage they've caused to the Russians, what they've been taking in Krinky is just big fat L's. They are tying their best quote-unquote FPV and drone units there because, of course, it's a good area to make kills. Let's not lie to ourselves. They have the high ground. They can see completely beyond the other side, and it's easy. And you're gonna rack kills. But then why doesn't this super duper mega fucking unit of Magyar go to fucking Avdiivka to help and protect the whole area? They don't do it because they're gonna get fucking smacked over there. Now you have the Russians hitting in Dnipro. That's like it's nothing. And they're hitting almost everything they want. They're hitting artillery, HIMARS, air defenses, accumulation of troops. Just fucking name it. And the most salient comparison is look how many Iskanders the Russians have been firing with evidence, and look at the only single Atacam strike that has an evidence, which was the strike near Kuban in Luhansk. And that one, I'm sorry, but I always made the analysis, maybe one hit the target. 3 were completely off target. And I had this discussion with multiple Nafwids who finally understood what the stupidity of what they were saying when people like Dara Masikot said that, oh, one maybe hit. They admitted. And then there was the whole discussion that, oh, the CEP is awful because it's an old missile. Yes, fine, but you are using a PAM ammunition system. So basically you are spreading bomblets over a huge territory. So the whole point is to hit this target by being close enough. Anyway, this is technical, it's nothing to do. But most importantly, what we saw in Kharkov is that first of all they attacked on the western bank of the Stary Saltov, and they kept going there and kept pocketing the Ukrainians on that area, which forced Ukrainians to reinforce the area because they were basically being scared that the Russians would attack exactly on that portion. And it's logical, as I said, it's the shortest road. It's Belgorod, Kharkov, 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers. But suddenly, the Russians started to attack beyond the Stary Saltov with the aim to open up the front on both sides and attack Veliki Buruk and end up on the back of the current Kupiansk line. I already explained this to or maybe relay this to other people, that in order for the Russians to threaten the Ukrainians on Kharkov itself, and I'm not speaking about a couple of cities, I'm speaking about threatening the whole uh, area of Kharkov, so basically threatening the E40 ring and the E105 and E306, the Russians would need to attack in a broad front over 110, 120 kilometers in a pincer attack and take both heights around the city of Kharkov and establish two kill zones of about 20 kilometers of range. It's not happening. What's happening is a very small force compared to what I would think you need for Kharkov, having a strategic raid approach, advancing in Ukrainian territory and pulling up resources in the open in order both to destroy them, but also forcing this unrelenting gushing wound. So basically, Ukrainians do not have prepared positions, or not enough for those. They go forward, they are in the open because they need to bring the troops from their back or from other fronts within these areas. They go through very limited inroads, as I said, with a small rewind I did. One grad was hit dead in the E40 ring. It was going up in order to attack the positions in Lipsy, and the Russians found it with a Lancet while it was traveling, hit it, and the grad went to shit. But this is the whole logic that we have. Ukrainians are exactly in the same position that the Russians were in 2022. They need to control the roads, they need to have the use of the roads, and they will need to have time to establish the same kind of salami tactic approach that they used in 2022 in order to push the Russians gradually out and liberate areas of traffic that would be crucial to them to reach all these positions. But right now, the most they can do is travel in common normal highway roads, be fully visible, and be taken out. And as I said, maybe the losses on the Ukrainian side are going to start plummeting within next week because they would have established fire positions, and that would allow them to also be a lot more concealed, stealthy, or whatever. But right now, the more they move, the more they get spotted, the more they get hit. And apparently, Army Group Nigeria has free fire in a logic that looks a lot like how Wagner had free reign on its ammunition and had free reign on its, let's say, management of both personnel and equipment. Now, where are they going with this? As I said, if this operation keeps going the same pace that the post-Avdiivka situation has evolved, within 2 to 3 months, so around the month early August, they would probably be at Veliki Burluk. And being at Veliki Burluk, first of all, as I said, is a huge shortening of the current line of attack. They would also spread the Ukrainians, because the best part of it is that Ukrainians right now had gone to this small lull where they were losing, but they weren't losing that many assets, to be frank, as many as I would like to. They were losing men a lot, losing positions a lot, and they couldn't sustain this tempo of Russian advances, but they still could, start thinking about what they're going to do on the back. But now you have a Kharkovite front, which is burning some assets in unprecedented rates, and it's also burning your units in unprecedented rates. I told you guys, in like 4 days, we've seen almost 60 or even more than 60 on tape prisoners of war. That's one company gone. Let's say that 2 other companies are killed or wounded. For such a small front, these are huge gains. Of course, it's localized, but that's also the type of war we're seeing in Ukraine. As I said, the main maneuvering unit is the company. It's not the battalion. It's not the brigade. It's not the BTG as it used to be for the Russian side. No, you are at the company level, and it's the company who does or undoes situations. And starting to lose one company on POWs and two other companies are killed and wounded for a front that literally is right now okay. Now it's a bit more meaty, but for the few first days it was irrelevant. Honestly, if I was Ukraine, I would literally have evacuated Lipsy already and try to take Heights and let the Russians come. A bit like what happened in 2022. Instead of that, orders were botched, people were captured, positions were captured, and they're losing a lot of assets. But don't forget, it's still right now not even 1/10 of the Avdiivka front. Yes, a lot of terrain has been lost. People were speaking about 100, 160 square kilometers with the gray area and everything. But look at the advancement. The whole point for the Russians is to make the connection over the Stary Saltov pond and then either advance on both sides, so go down from Lipsy and go down from Volchansk. I had my opinion that they should lock more or less south of Lipsy, and then push completely down to Volchansk, southeast, and then take Veliki Buluk, completely control the highway there, and pose a direct threat to the Kupiansk line for the Ukrainians, which the Ukrainians would then force to abandon them, and which, of course, at that point would cause a complete front collapse in the area and cause the Ukrainians to lose at least half of the gains they made in the Kharkov offensive of 2022. Politically, this move is a game changer. Militarily, honestly, and I'm probably the most zero out there, it wouldn't change much for the Ukrainians. It would be a very bad optic. It would shorten the front for the Russians with aims lower, so Kupiansk and lower. But for Kharkov, for as long as Chuguiv is not taken and is not controllable from the Russian side, it doesn't really matter. Sure, the situation is going to be shitty. Sure, maybe the Russians are going to push from Sumy, and then you have a completely different problem if you're Ukraine, because then you're literally stretched. Then you literally are Sylvia Saint on a camera set circa 1995, 1996. But it doesn't really matter. You're already fucked by then. You're not a virgin anymore. Your situation is literally pizda. So at this point, you start to make some calls and you start to hope that whoever is supporting you is going to actually intervene. So that's my opinion when I say it doesn't matter. You are fucked for fucked anyway. Now, shouldn't we then be more attentive and say, oh, wait, why are the Russians doing this right now if they do not have all the forces? As I said, for myself, I see this as a predatory opportunistic action, which he's paying some dividends, and probably he's going to pay a lot more dividends. And it's not that much different from what the Ukrainians did to the Russians in 2022. There wasn't this huge, unrelenting force. The forces prepared for the assault in Kharkov in 2022. They were between 8 and 15,000 people. They just found a completely disorganized Russian rear who was surprised by the very efficient use of HIMARS, very efficient use of artillery, but most importantly, their sights were completely stuck within the upcoming Bahmut operation back then. And I think that the vision of Prigozhin was like this. The fact that Prigozhin was such a fucking personality, I think completely cluttered the thinking of the Russian side. Because instead of being focused on the price And this price, as I said, wasn't some kind of, oh, let's go there and check everything and it's going to be fine. Let's take Bahmut because then we can advance towards Konstantinovka or further west. The problem is that that dude was literally sucking the energy of every other front. And he was a whiner for a kind of a period. We were all having fun with the personality, with the PR and all that stuff. But the reality is that he was completely cluttering our vision. And the vision was that Russian choices in February 2022 were starting to produce their backblast, their backlash, their negative byproduct. That was the problem with Kherson. As I said, they never managed to get Nikolaev, which would have precluded what happened in Kherson. That was a huge problem, and it was never settled down, and the Ukrainians were able to bank on it, and we have the situation Krinky. Same thing for Kharkov. A lot of preparations were being done for the troops that Prigozhin was asking for his operation in Donbass. That took out a lot of equipment and took out a lot of ammunition. I'm not saying that's Wagner's fault completely for uh, ignoring the situation in Kharkov. No, but I'm saying that Prigozhin's antics played also a role into, you know what, it's not a problem. We're gonna stick with the plan. A lot of what the Russians did all over 2022 and a part of 2023, Ugledar was such a problem, and Ugledar hasn't been solved either. So I'm not gonna say that it's on Prigozhin alone, but I'm trying to explain here that, in a sense, that clutter, that chit chat from the guy, his charisma, I think, in a certain sense, hid the problems that this plan was also causing. But anyway, now fundamentally, let's go back to the digression I made. Now the Russians are doing exactly what the Ukrainians did to them in 2022. The difference is that they are not going for a liberation. They do not have a plan to go A, B, C, D. What they want from the Ukrainians right now is that the Ukrainians commit more troops into this direction. It's a reverse Krinky, if you want. But with the difference that there is no pawn to keep them away from the territory of Ukraine. And there also are not enough equipment to stop them by literally walking in. Now, we've heard it's a trap. We have cut and kill groups on Ukrainian side. And of course, we're going to have images of FPVs hitting individual soldiers, artillery trying to rain down hell on Russians advancing, and so forth and so on. However, one of the things that's happening right now is that in Volchansk, normally the Ukrainians should have the upper hand because they can use heavy equipment that we are not seeing on Russian side. Of course, this leads to Lancets, FPVs on Russian side, artillery doing its job. Something that we saw in Avdiivka, something that we saw in Soledar, that we saw in Krasnogorivka and so on. Although Krasnogorivka, the mechanized part of the assault and transportation, is integral to what was going there. But every time that the Russians have had a foothold within any city, they bring up the artillery to bear, and that thing changed everything. And that's what's going on in Volchansk, apparently, is that the Russians are not moving unopposed, but they're going forward. And this has never been that obvious in the sense that Ukrainians have a manpower problem. When infantry moves on unabated and unchecked, you do not only have an artillery or an asset problem, you have a body problem, bodies that would plug your gaps. Now we've seen something else. We've seen dragon teeth just laid on the side road, never used, and so on. Fine. corruption and Ukraine are synonymous, so I wouldn't start piling up on that. What I would say, though, this is something that we should have known by now, is that whatever Ukraine is saying, for some aspects of its defense, offense, military, whatever, is a lie. We had the logic that Kharkov's defenses were the strongest. Zelejido said that. And now we learn that there have been graft, corruption, theft, or straight up ignorance and incompetence into fulfilling these plans. And on top of it, we're seeing also videos where Ukrainian workers in the region are saying we cannot fucking dig. We got FPVs hitting our machines. So the biggest problem here is the following. Russia is doing to Ukraine what Ukraine did to Russia in 2022. But as I said, the difference is that Russia doesn't need Kharkov. I know people are going, what you're saying? Yes, Russia does not need Kharkov. Russia needs Ukraine to have a Kharkov front. Russia needs Ukraine to start pulling equipment over 190 kilometers from its nearest current stabilized position. Russia needs the Ukrainians to start having logistical problems as fuck. Russia needs the Ukrainians to also pull out all the reserves that they are holding by adopting this porcupine position in southern Donetsk, central Donetsk, and Zaporozhye. Russia needs the Ukrainians to start fucking running for their piggy bank when it comes to troops, material, ammunition, and start expanding them to stop something that, I'm going to repeat it, Russia doesn't need. It's extremely cynical, and it's extremely the way how Ukraine played in 2022. It went for broke between February and June, stabilized the situation, playing into Russia's miscalculations, and then started to get refilled by the West. Artillery, vehicles, precision, long-range fires, and so on and so forth. And it had so much so gone full tilt those few first months that the Russians themselves were also worn down and were scattered all over almost 2,000 kilometers of front. Now, of course, the shoe is in the other foot. Now the Russians, as I said, they are not spending 100,000 more troops. They are not going for the piggy bank run. You can see by yourself how many vehicles are being hit. It's night and day with a fucking mass of shit they threw in Avdiivka. But so are the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians wanted to spare shit, they cannot. So at the end, this attrition is now fully complete. If the Russians have another 5 to 10,000 to throw in Sumy, that would be even worse. Because then you will have a logistical hub that will have to go from Kiev. You're going to have to open up your cards and show, these are my equipment spots. From here, I'm bringing up my troops. Right now, as I said, you can put multiple trucks in a huge underground storage in Kiev, have them drive in unmarked trucks, and it's done. Nobody is going to see you until you're beyond Zhytomyr, going southward, eastward, northeastward. But now, you have multiple small fires to put out. You're going to have to show your cards. In a sense, it's as much a military as an intelligence operation from the Russian side. And I don't know if you guys saw an article on the Wall Street Journal on it's titled "The Misfits Russia is Using for its Intelligence War," and it's a 20-year-old Ukrainian refugee living in Poland who initially was just doing manual job for the Russians, was recruited via Instagram, and then suddenly he went full tilt and apparently had installed cameras over the rail track from Poland to Ukraine, which helped the Russians pinpoint equipment movements and pinpoint storage units. If you want, I mean, like it's on the Wall Street Journal, it reads like a fucking sci-fi stuff when we think about how Potbellies did 2022, and I'm aiming at multiple so-called Zegos that keep fucking doubting. And apparently, a huge storage, according to the paper again, was blown up, and it's possible that's a storage in the Lviv region that went pop. But anyway, so this is the logic we're having right now. We're having a Russian force that has never been so sharp. Of course, they're having losses because the modus operandi hasn't changed. FPVs are still there. American intelligence is still there. American satellite network is still there. Starlink is still there. Ukrainians are not bingo on ammo. I said that over a year and a half ago. They will never be allowed to be bingo on ammo. If they would need ammunition, for fuck's sake, they will find a way to send them, even if it would cost a complete depletion of the stocks in Europe, America, Japan, whenever. The problem would be that they would not have enough to take care of every single fucking fire that pops out. And no, we have had the discussion. Precision strikes work when you have eyes. Precision strikes work when you have the numbers. Quality will never trump quantity in these cases unless we are speaking Zulu spear against Maxim machine gun. And even then, the problem is that Ukrainians do not have enough superior quality assets. They do not have enough troops of any kind of quality. And it's always the same fucking 10 to 15 brigades that get clapped trying to stop the Russians, and then they get pulled back within 3 weeks to 2 months because they are bled to death. This fucking honey badger approach that the Russians have enshrined is going to stick. And I said not because they're stupid or they're suicidal, but because right now there is no other solution that is politically, militarily, and economically feasible. Politically, some things that they might buy in China, for instance, they cannot. The Chinese do not want to be openly selling shit to the Russians. Some things I might buy in Iran, for some reason, and I'm still taking the example of Yalmaz, the Russians have not been showing to do it. It has probably to do with the fact that if they buy it, then they're going to have a influx of the same type of weapon. Like if they buy the Almaz, they're going to have the Spike. But into my opinion, for the Almaz, at least it's stupid because the Javelin, although it's not the same system, offers the same capability up to a certain point. So it doesn't matter. And by the time that they're dealing with the Iranians, they could have their own reverse engineered copy, although they already had such a system with autonomia. But where is it? That's the questioning. So there are still fucking gaps in the Russian armor. There are fucking gaps in the Russian understanding of war. And the Russians are doing this on a budget, despite the fact that everybody is saying that, oh my god, they're spending the most they've done ever. Speaking of which, now we go to another subject, which is our beloved Tuvan Baboon is out from the Ministry of Defense, and in his spot we have probably the most dangerous change, in my opinion, for the Ukrainian armed forces, which is a technocrat and a doctrinal THD member. whereas Shoigu would be a military man with his views, a certain approach, a everything for the front kind of logic, but with a huge luggage of problems, corruption, graft. I mean, for fuck's sake, his previous circle is either in jail or indicted. So it is what it is. But I'm expecting from Belousov two things. And actually, the first discussion we had in TWK, I said he's an Air Force lobby guy, and he will deal with the FPV, I'd say, bottleneck so far. And here we have him speak about this, I think 3 or 4 months before he even entered, by saying straight to the face to Putin, we have a problem with the UAV program. Only 10 to 30% is homegrown. All the rest comes from abroad. Once again, this is logical. The Russians, even if they want, they cannot replace China when it comes to cost, convenience, and expanse. However, the Russians buying components in China, but building their own assets with it and reducing the delocalization of the systems from 30% maximum that's now locally made to 60-70% locally made, a bit like the Turks, would change a lot. And also would take out one of the claims that the Americans are leveling towards China right now, which is Chinese are helping the Russians out. We had news recently that a agro drone manufacturer from China was setting up shop in Russia in order, of course, to circumvent the payment issues. And that's something I always said. For the Chinese, the best thing to do right now, especially with the Russians being willing to concede a lot of advantages, would be to start putting up manufacturing processes or assembly processes within Russia. It doesn't need to be a fluky thing, because at the end of the day, it most probably will regard a wartime production of expendable assets. So basically, you start building up this chain, but most of that trash is not going to be sold by the Russians in Africa for whatever process. No, it would be used to fucking bomb kills to death. And once the war is over and the production is unnecessary, given that it would have been done at the state level, there would be no problem for the Russians to simply uh, allow the Chinese to disengage or to change the purpose of the manufacturing process and to sustain deeper down. Because, as I said, the biggest advantage that the Russians have now is that, given they underwent a thinning of their storage when it comes to artillery, tank, AD, and so forth, they will have to rebuild at least part of those reserves within the next 10 years. So the Russian MiG has a booming period post SMO, and of course, I do not see it as reaching the same heights that it would reach probably this year, next year. But clearly, given the many bottlenecks, the many issues, the many lies also the Russian MIC was living with, basically we don't need a second tank manufacturing plant. What the actual fuck, bro? And now we are going back to, maybe we'll need not only a second one, but we'll need a third one for the future variations of what are we building right now. So once again, we go back to the fact that the boon, the bonanza of the Russian MiG from 2007 to 2020, more or less, that apparently made a lot of people rich, is for the moment technically over. And of course, Belousov, in my opinion, I think it's both a looks like a man on a mission, but most importantly, over the mission, looks like a guy who will find the same way to streamline production and have less losses, like it happened with the moved production from Western Russia to Eastern Russia during the Great Patriotic War / World War II, where a tank, let's say T-34, from I don't know X number of components was streamlined down to X number of components minus N, and so forth and so forth. Plus, one of the things that Russia has understood with this war, and we can see that with the Iranian applications, is that it needs to sustain a war by going effective, efficient, and cheap. It doesn't matter how much your Abrams can see in the dark. It doesn't matter how much armor you're going to put on that shit. If you got 20 FPVs to fire that motherfucker, it will not matter that your Abrams is 60 or 100 tons, for as long as that thing needs to move. And the Russians are paying the cost of this antiquated vision every single day. We have Tsar Mangal, we have EW monsters, we have attempts to go fast, so trying to avoid minefields with so-so results. In a sense, sustainment needs to be cheap enough, efficient enough, effective enough. Efficient means that you don't need to spend a fuck ton boatload of money to have a decent result. And on top of that, it needs, of course, to be rather cheap. So that there we come with the Shahid. The Shahid component-wise, if you need to build it yourself, is going to cost you a certain amount that right now, put into the international market, compared to things that exist, so the Harop is a tenth as expensive on export contracts. And the analysis with things like the Shahid and so on makes it extremely complicated for people to understand where the fuck did the Russians go wrong with the drones, first of all, but also where the fuck did the Russians go wrong with everything. Communication, uh, resilience of communication. The only thing that's bright, and that needs to be said, that the Americans are recognizing begrudgingly, is electronic warfare, and still it's not enough. Everybody's saying that. Ukrainians are saying that, Europeans are saying that, Americans are saying that. Very strong EW game, but it's not enough because territory, because passive ISR, because proxy war game rules, and so on and so on and so on. Now imagine other players, except for China, imagine other players in Europe. French, German, British army are not even close to that, just because their cost is way higher. And people can say, yeah, but there is no quality. We've seen that quality, for fuck's sake. The Challenger got hit once, disappeared. Americans sent 31 Abrams, and every single one of them is just a fucking living target. There is no difference for tanks in this war. You can be a 70-ton fucking behemoth from NATO, or you can be a 41-ton from Soviet Union. You can still end up with an FPV up your ass, a Lancet up your pipe, or worse, an artillery strike that's gonna fucking track you. And if you're lucky, you're gonna blow up in a mine. Honestly, this war, when it comes to the armor itself, is asking the toughest of questions. It's not Desert Strike, it's not the Iraqi Civil War, it's not World War II, it's not the Vietnam War. No, here you are in any kind of armored shit, you are honestly a dead man because you're a big fucking juicy target, and the guys who are hunting you in average are between 10 and 15 kilometers. So you don't even have the chance to fire back. That's how sad and helpless is this war for the armored corps. And of course, there have been tank battles. And of course, there have been close shootouts. And of course, the Ukrainians have found ways to employ their automatic guns and so on. Same for the Russians. And of course, the armored corps is needed more than ever. I'm not saying that it's not needed. I'm a former tanker myself. But when it comes to the concepts, when it comes to the designs, when it comes to what you need to survive, you are, except for open infantry, you are in the shittiest position because you're noisy, you're self-evident, you cannot hide yourself properly, given that the ISR, tactical ISR, is cheap and efficient now. For a fucking €100 thermal camera on the FPV, you can see your ass, they can see your ass for 500 meters to a full fucking kilometer. Not even discussing a general drone checking your coordinates, giving them to the guys who are flying the FPV, and then you're in deeper shit over 10, 15 kilometers. I'm explaining that this war is probably, in my opinion, the hardest test for the armored corps. And this is, I think, also what the Russians have decided not to go the armored road for Kharkov, because unlike, in my opinion, unlike what they're doing in Donetsk and so on, they are not sure of recovering most of the armor in Kharkov Oblast. And this is where I'm going by the fact that it's an opportunistic, predatory movement. And the most important part for the Russians right now is to stretch the Ukrainians. If they can, because that's also a funny thing, if they can take advantage of that and get closer to Kharkov and provoke a breakdown in the lines of Ukraine, so be it. But so far, the idea is literally just to fucking stretch the piggers out and take advantage of it in the east. And on that, I have to say that I don't really agree. I don't find it a proper use of assets when it comes to the strategic term, because in my opinion, unfortunately, the Ukrainians are still have still too much life in them. So it's true, this is going to batter them. It's going to put them in a coma for a while. But at the end of the day, what keeps them alive, it was what are they going to be given? And on that aspect, it's a plus that the Ukrainians are committing assets that they were otherwise holding for later this year or next year. But at the same time, at some point, they will, I hope so, they will understand what the Russians are doing, and they will go back to the whole fucking porcupine defense they were doing elsewhere, and they will just like let the Russians stagnate in these regions. And then they're going to start trying to figure out a response, probably, as I said, probably by trying to go Westerners to rescue them. But overall, this doesn't seem to be happening, although, I mean, maybe Blinken, while he was playing his guitar, told Kuleba that the cavalry was coming. You never know. But this is my opinion on the Kharkov operation. I'm expecting, as I said, a lot more from a partial collapse in the central and southern Donetsk Oblast, and I already discussed it. Right now, the front line there is about 114 kilometers, and if things go as they are looking to be going down there, the front line would be down to less than 80 kilometers, which is a good 30 kilometers of shortening. This, of course, helps the Russians focalize their effort in the attacking position. Also, can be helping the Ukrainians because shorter front works both ways. But in this case, given that the Ukrainians are recoiling, and the Russians are getting what they want, because you only have that much space to recoil right now on the Donetsk Oblast, unless, as I said, you are going for this guerre aux trans, which was spoken about previously. And then, indeed, then you are looking at something that the small operation Kharkov and the pushes in Donetsk Oblast are not going to change because the Ukrainians have decided to basically self-immolate for reasons that nobody would understand because no polity is worth the destruction of your people, unless for the chosen people, obviously. But yeah, that's my problem right now. I'm going to repeat what I said. It doesn't really matter what the Russians are doing tactically right now. We're going to see the results of it probably, as I said, within 2 months. But the attention still needs to be on the Donetsk Oblast. As I said, the sister cities, the advance on Chasov Yar, the advancement on Kurakovo, and the nullification of Pokrovsk as a basically logistics and reinforcement hub. Just if you force Pokrovsk to be a frontline city instead of being this hub, then you're going to change completely the course of the war on that area. Because as I said, Pokrovsk is the biggest hub in the region. If you take it out in a way or another, the next storage slash hub that you can create is going to be Poltava, and that's going to take you a fuck ton of time to reorganize and be as efficient as Pokrovsk because it's over 60 kilometers away. So your detour for resupply of other positions is going to be a huge problem and hampering of your defensive strategy slash tactics. So just to go down to what we said. First thing, Russians are on a roll. This TWK said that in May we were expecting funny news, but I personally was expecting something from the Ukrainians within the month of May or June in order to relent the Russian pressure in Donetsk Oblast. This hasn't happened. Actually, we are seeing a completely different scenario where the Ukrainians are now caught in a crossfire with shit happening in Kharkov and a bigger pressure in Donetsk. They are losing a PR battle with their them completely vacating Robotine, and I'm expecting a full uh, breakdown, nervous breakdown once Robotine is going to be announced retaken by the Russians, and then the Kharkov op itself, as I said, does not seem as a strategic move right now per se, but it's part of a strategic move. In this case, first threatening the Ukrainians, but secondly, and this is the most important part, forcing the Ukrainians to make choices, as I said. And if it's true that they're going to push for uh, basically Sumy, so open a third fire on the northern front, because two fires are one Lipsy's side, second Volchan's side. Okay, they're close to each other, but still. Then the Ukrainians are going to have to be forced to completely spread out and pull out reserves that they were holding for further Russian advancement in Donetsk. So that is a strategic bet right now. Is it going to work? As I said, we're going to have to see this within 2 months. If within 2 months the Ukrainians make that mistake, which is basically going in a chimp out and sending assets that don't have or they shouldn't be losing to get lost in a literally limited push northeastern Ukraine, then you're going to have a bigger problem, strategic problem, where the Russians are still going to push. They're going to push and push in Donetsk, completely expelling the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian backfield from Donetsk Oblast. And once that backfield is completely out of Donetsk Oblast, it's just your tempo that gets slower. This is something that happened to the Russians once again in Kherson. In Kherson, their backfield, once HIMARS started to fly, was beyond the river. The backfield at some point was almost in Crimea, which was where the front line was up to October 2022, over 80 kilometers. So there was the safest haven they could find due to the HIMARS strikes and other missiles, because it wasn't only the HIMARS that were used, TWKs were used as well, and Smerch. So if it's this, then it's fine. But my opinion is that the Russians are just starting to have that appetite, seeing how badly the Ukrainians are faring within the first localities, first vicinities. And indeed, as I said, if within 2 months we find them over 50 kilometers deep in Ukrainian territory outside of Kharkov, then we have a problem if you're the Ukrainians, because what seemed to be just a foray, a raid, or a feint is going to become a fully fledged front. Because right now, Deep State concedes 100 to 160 square kilometers. But if you have Veliki Burluk, you are going to be looking at over 2,000 square kilometers lost. And of course, I'm going to say something that people are not going to like. It's garbage territory. Because at the end, once again, the only thing you're going to do is just trying to collapse the Kupiansk line on the Volchansk side. But if indeed Sumy works the same way, so within 2 or 3 weeks, you are back in Sumy, hello, you got a problem. And the problem is shared because the Russians will need to feed this advancing army. So they need to, double dip, triple dip. But the Ukrainians as well. So once again, what's going on right now will need to be, seen with a bit of recoil. We're going to speak about this operation again in June to see more or less how it looks like. But if things go as fast as they look to be going these few last days, then indeed, in French we say, l'appétit vient en mangeant. The appetite comes by eating. If you start gobbling territory like that, and the Ukrainians are in the same kind of shitty situation or worse, then of course, a lot of people are going to just turn around and say, oh, I knew it was the right offensive from the get-go. I do not think so. I think that it's a very nice tactical maneuver, benefiting from the same incompetence that troops have been showing for a long while now. And at the end of the day, as I say, I rather go with the least palatable option for us, Zigros, and be wrong than go with the better palatable options for us, and still be wrong. My opinion here is pretty simple, pretty clear cut. The Russian forces are doing something. I'm going to repeat what I said, that I wasn't expecting from them or from the Russian leadership. It shows a completely different view and a completely different approach on the way they see to they seem to see the front. And honestly, I would like to be wrong on this one. I would like to have the Russians just do something that we usually saw the Ukrainians do, which is transforming a rather bad PR approach into something victorious, a bit like what happened to them with the Russian mistakes in May and June 2022 in the region of Kharkov, when they spent themselves trying to get down to Balakleya, and it just collapsed that area of the front. So that's it, not more, not less. I still consider this a tactical operation. And once again, I would like to be wrong, and I would like to have been wrong on this one by saying that I would only see any kind of option in Kharkov with a second army. But if they need to open another front in Sumy and still another 10,000 people, of course, it's going to be tactical and technical. But yes, then it's another army for both directions, 20,000 people. So this is more or less what I have for the tactical option. I'm not going to discuss anything else today because to me it makes no sense. I have no further insights. As I said, I just consider Belousov to be a logical replacement after the rather big issues that the Russian MiG found out the hard way. So basically, that it had choked itself to death by thinking that it wouldn't need more steel and more assets than the one it could mobilize within 6 months. And of course, this proved completely wrong by the fact that the people it was fighting against had, let's be honest, help and had multiple shots in their arm ongoingly throughout 2022 and a big part of 2023. And yet, in both cases, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for Russia to win the war outright, but it wasn't enough for Ukraine to beat Russia. So once again, a guy like Belousov coming in, trying to normalize, streamline, and make the overall layout of the Russian MiG something of a better place, in my opinion, is exactly what is needed instead of, as I said before, reinforcing the wrongs of the past, which is having almost no decent MIC, and for a lot of issues, literally having to go up and down the now known import substitution road, which in fact is just substituting one type of imports from the West to another type of imports, mostly from China or from the West via local import partners from Tajikistan, Central Asia, shell companies within Europe, and so on and so forth. So that's my that's the thread for today. Now it's up to you to ask questions. I'm probably gonna add a couple of few things when it comes to the quality of the opposition that the Russians are facing these last couple of days. And a lot of the opposition has been coming from units that supposedly were the tip of the spear on the Ukrainian side, and yet they haven't been able to do much in relenting the Russian attacks, be that in Kharkov or down under in Donetsk Oblast. And the only quote unquote bright spot for the Ukrainians so far has been, unfortunately, needs to be told, long range strikes by the newly provided attackants, which, however, have not at all the same kind of impact that HIMARS had back in 2022. So, yeah, as I said, guys, up to you for your interventions if you want to chime in and so on. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, go on. Jovan, go on. You may go.
Okay. Well, thanks for the analysis. It was very nice. But I would add that there was an attempt of opening the Kharkov front line, but in the opposite direction. So there was an incursion towards Belgorod of so-called these Russian Liberation Army, or what they're called, and this failed. So um, I would kind of roughly compare this to the Russian attempt from the other side, and it seems that the Russian attempt is more successful. And it seems to me that they didn't want to, capture Belgorod, the Ukrainians, and they attempted that. Maybe they wanted to get close enough to use ordinary artillery on Belgorod, and that would look very bad that Russians need to evacuate the city and stuff like that. But they failed. So I don't know what you think. Can you compare these two situations? But because they look a lot similar to each other, and Ukrainians were defeated.
Well, I already made the joke about the Ukraine Liberation Army coming for that Kharkov People's Republic. But the point in comparing the Ardika clown show with what the Russians are doing right now is night and day. On a sense, we always knew that the Ardika clown show that has now happened three times in the past 2 years. So first they started in March 2023, then they started again in May 2023, which was allegedly the most quote unquote serious encroachment in 2023 with the Russian border, which ended, as we now know, within 24 hours. But they milked it and they basically served into the military correspondents, Russian military correspondents, need to make have clout, make numbers and stuff like that. Uh, this year it was completely different because they were so-called better prepared, but they lost the most asset, the most assets for the Ukrainians in about 3 to 4 days that Ukrainians in that time span had been losing for 2 weeks. Of course, they were in fully defensive mode, but this showed that it wasn't at all a kind of, we're going to liberate Belgorod, attack Belgorod, and so on. Compare that to what's going on right now, where the whole offensive power of the Ukrainian forces in March 2024 is proven to be a loss, either POWs, either wounded or killed in action, as a strict minimum right now. In 10th of May, we are today the 15th, in 5 days. The scale of which the Russians are attacking, be that by the losses, be that by the expanse, be that also by the plan, we are locating them now in Lipsy or in the outskirts of Lipsy. I mean, I've already made a couple of maps. It is not at all the same thing. Where I agree is that on top of what the Russians would do normally on an invasion, there was this problem of Belgorod being hit systematically by Ukrainian forces, and we had multiple tragedies. The latest one was the building that completely collapsed, or at least a span of the building that collapsed the 12th of May. Then we had the attack with Vilka and Uragans in the city center that honestly showed, it was proof enough for me that Ukrainians do not care about what they're doing. That's why I said, to me, it's a retaliation in nature, in kind, because they now consider every single Russian to be a target. So on that aspect, it's not comparable at all. However, it is well comparable in the intent. The intent here was indeed to cause trouble for the Russians, to press the Russians to get into a defensive position and pull troops from their operational axis, which was mostly the so-called Pokrovsk axis. But the Russians didn't bite because they had enough troops, and they also had, unlike last year, already treated the most dangerous unit within the RDK, which was the Artan unit that set shop in Ochtyrka and was preparing to attack cross border. They ate a couple of Iskanders, couple of artilleries, lost to Bogdan and other artillery, plus a lot of troops, and they never took part in the so-called invasion of Belgorod and Kursk Oblast. So, in a sense, it makes no difference, I'm going to say, to point out the commonalities and differences, because fundamentally, whereas that might have been a propelling factor for the Russian current assault, I think that in the long run, what the Russians were doing for now almost a year with the FABs, with the cross border raids and so on, was exactly to get to this point. And this point is basically hitting the Ukrainians in their chin and making them double check the directions and making them double check their preparedness and their area of defense. However, I'm going to tell you, I'm extremely surprised uh, that the Ukrainians were completely, I'm going to repeat it, completely unable to foresee both the kind of attack they would have, so mostly infantry backed by artillery and by drones, of course, but also the Russians knowing their weaknesses. It seems to me that the Ukrainians, for some reason, are stuck in 2022, but for almost everything. As I said, their offensive approach, their defensive approach, their view on how the Russians actually are. To me, I'm sorry, but I do not understand how the Ukrainians are still not able to process the fact that the Russian military of 2024, with all its problems, is not the Russian military of 2022. And in a certain sense, thank God for the Ukrainians, because, the losses in 2022 were baffling and actually are putting now a strain on how the Russians are thinking are thinking their offensive process, and this allows the Ukrainians to have those at least visual victories, which are the FPVs attacking APCs, tanks, and so on. Had the Russians the same kind of vision that I have right now, we would never be at this point. If the ISR was the same as it was right now, a lot of situations which turned sour in 2022 would have never happened in 2024. But that it is what it is. In hindsight, everything could have been different, but it isn't. So we need to accept the things the way they are, not the way we want them to be. And in that aspect, I do not think that we're gonna find a better, I'd say, comparison between how the Russians are doing right now and how the Ukrainians did to the Russians in early September, late August in the Kharkov area. So I do not think that they're comparable in scale, intensity, and capability, but I think they are related in the sense that those raids actually showed that it was a nuisance, it was an inconvenience, and it had to go away. And the best way to go away is to push that boundary further. And you can compare that aspect with the thought process that went after Avdiivka, although Avdiivka has a strategic meaning beyond just having this buffer zone in front of Donetsk. But yeah, in a certain sense, if the Ukrainians are in such bad states in the area, was very simple. They are going to have a rerun of Avdiivka, and we might very well have a larger buffer zone around Kharkov. Please go on.
Yeah, well, it kind of looks to me that Russians maybe somehow calculated that the Ukrainians are low on reserves. Okay, low on maybe reserves of men which are quality. They can always, I think, they can always gather a lot of troops, but the problem is the quality, and it seems like they wanted to test the stretching of Ukrainians with opening a new front, and it's obvious that Russians have troops for the Kharkov front at least. Maybe not for taking Kharkov, but at least for starting this. But what is unknown to me is how much will the happenings on the Kharkov front will affect the Russian capabilities in Donetsk area, Avdiivka area. Did Russians suffer with troops and supplies and ammunition? Did they have to reroute something from Avdiivka and Donetsk area towards Kharkiv? If they didn't have, if they can sustain both places at the same time, I would guess that it's a very good thing, but I'm not sure. So it's kind of unknown. Did Russians have to deplete somewhere else to put resources into Kharkov? And did Ukrainians have enough quality reserves to send to Kharkov without weakening some other spots? But I see that a lot of analysts are saying that Ukrainians are sending some units from other places to Kharkov, but this is not really an evidence. This is only, maybe the Ukrainians are deliberately lying. So I'm wondering what's the state of reserves of Ukrainians.
Well, the thing is that whereas we can think that the Ukrainians are lying, their POWs aren't. And as I said, at least we have at least 60 on tape. And we are hearing that the 54th is concerned. We are hearing that people, okay, from Kraken is normal because there was their area. We are hearing that people from the 144th as well are busy there. So there are a lot of units that are there for a reason or another. One reason is their natural AO. Others are clearly, like the 72nd, are clearly being sent over there. And we are also seeing CV90s, so maybe 93rd or any kind of such unit is being pushed. So there is definitely a small panic and is definitely rushing some units from one side of the front to the other. However, the biggest problem to me, at least this is how I see it, we shouldn't really care about what kind of troops Ukraine is going to send there. And I'm going to tell you why. We should care if Ukraine is going to send troops at all. Any kind of unit that's going to go over there to quote unquote push back the Russians, we need supplies, we need logistics, we need assets. And those assets we've seen 3 or 4 Bogdanas in a couple of days, whereas the Bogdana was a bit like the Caesar, was a exotic bird in the strike table of the Russian forces. The more we're seeing these Bogdanas, the more we're understanding they are pulling reserves that they usually wouldn't do because they were back into this, as I said, porcupine mode, whereas they would just get hit and wait until the Russians literally run out of gas, uh, both literally and figuratively speaking. However, as I said, by seeing these new losses in such a short time span and such a short area of combat, you're having a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is that you need to show your logistics. You need to show how much troops you're going to put there. You are going to transfer forces if you don't want to lose the area. And in my opinion, they should actually not send anyone. They should let the units that are over there get overrun or pushed back into positions when the Russians will need to do what the Ukrainians are doing now, which is Ukrainians are still over 20 kilometers from the outer Kharkov ring. The Russians are 5 kilometers from their border, 5 to 10. So for the Russians, the resupply chain is shorter. What made the Russians lose the first Kharkov battle is that they were going to an away match in Kharkov itself. But if the Russians, as I said, just use this option to clear up Veliki Buluk and the Kupiansk rear and go down to Shevchenko and attack Chuguiv, then you will have the same problem the Ukrainians had in 2022 when they took over 3 months to completely start clearing the surrounding of Chuguiv, in order then to attack up north and clear up the northern part, Kozachi Lopan, Liptsi, and so on. So, if I was the Russian observer, my biggest scare is to see the Ukrainians not reinforcing, unless they drop some HIMARS left and right, or they overfly Kharkov with MiG-29s and launch ASM 250s. But starting to feed up troops that I will definitely lose, because that's the thing. It's not that these troops are going to turn the tide. All these troops will need to fight an infantry battle within city limits, exceptionally in Volchansk. That's the kind of battle that Ukrainians cannot afford to have, because it will require bodies. The Russians took Mariupol and took a fuck ton of losses. The Russians took Avdiivka, took fuck ton of losses. Bakhmut, fuck ton of losses. But the Ukrainians suffered the same. So you are already having a manpower problem, an asset problem, and a logistical problem. What do? Do you exacerbate it by going after the Russians? By biting in the screen attack? Or you say, you know what, I'm gonna fucking go back in porcupine mode in Kharkov and let you waste your fucking assets, start pulling out your tanks, I'm gonna use my FPVs and clear them out, and what would you have gained? Just a 6 months occupation of this area, and after 6 months, then you go back at it again. Of course, this would enable this Sisyphus paradigm where to get that shit back, you will need to start have your own losses, and getting back the border would mostly be PR again, because rinse and repeat, the Russians are going to come back, the border is still there. This is not the same problem as in Donetsk, where you need to have 100 kilometers to regain. This is 10, 15, 20, even 30 kilometers. And it was done within 3 months at the height of the Russian initial offensive. But knowing the Ukrainians now after 2 and something years, they will not do that. They will be stupid. They will try to hold every inch of territory. I hope so. And they're going to get weakened all over the whole front. They're going to show their logistics. They're going to show their assets as well. I mean, how many months, even years, we spoke about the Frank and Sam. We had never seen these books before. And Pam, we saw 3 of them, or 2 plus the transloader. How many times we heard about the Supercat with the Astrams? Never saw it until it got burned. So this is when I'm going to go again with this thing. The more the Ukrainians are going to try and resist in that area, in that pocketed area, the more their losses are going to be a lot more complicated to replace than the losses they're getting in southern Donetsk, central Donetsk, and Zaporozhye. Especially if we consider only Kharkov as their backfield. And I'm going to repeat, in order to attack Kharkov, you still will have to have 100,000 people. It's a 1.5 million city. Even if half of those guys are in the spot, it makes it a fucking nightmare to control. You will have seasons per micro districts of the city. So 3 months per small quarters. That's how bad it's going to be. It's going to be the Battle of Aleppo on steroids.
Yeah, but what about the encirclement? If they encircle Kharkiv and then just wait it out?
That was tried once. How did it end? The only way to encircle Kharkiv, or at least to scare the Ukrainians to encircle Kharkiv, would be to start another operation on the other flank. I'm going to put a map on that to more or less illustrate what I mean. But you would need to get as I said, a 60-kilometer corridor between your two pincers, and then you'll need to go 60, 70 kilometers deep. The cordon around Kharkov over there would be something that the Russians couldn't do when the Ukrainians were fleeing, quote unquote. Okay, now it could be something different because the Ukrainians are spent, they have another front to take care of, and if there is a Sumy attack, that would be a complete shit show for them. True. But it's also a gambit for the Russians because then you also would need the troops to start clearing up the city. And it's true that the biggest danger, in my opinion, would be not as much from the regulars of the Ukrainian army, but from locals in Kharkov who would start taking pot shots at the Russians. And then you create situations when you're going to have maybe a whole neighborhood of locals going after you, and you are like a small company, and you got to have 500-600 guys, okay, armed only with RPGs and AKs, but it's still a problem. This is my biggest situation with Kharkov right now. It doesn't seem to be ready for the encirclement. It doesn't seem to be ready for clearance, but it does seem ready to provoke a complete suction of the Ukrainian troops in the area. And if that happens, well, it would be already a magnificent goal. Because, first of all, the Ukrainians are going to start committing reserves and troops they don't need to commit. They will start committing artillery ammunition, artillery assets, and AAVs they don't need to commit, but they will. And most importantly, they will show off what's their route. We saw just before the attacking the Kharkov area, a storage unit in Malarohan. It's a frigorified storage unit getting hit by UMPB, and you can see a military vehicle going to load there, and the storage unit got hit. So this shows how I think the Russians are worried of overextending there, but how the Russians are going to make the most of this, I'd say, push towards Kharkov. So, in my opinion, right now, what's the most important part for the Russians is just to have the measure. How much you want to spend on this op? What is your main purpose? If your main purpose is indeed to draw more Ukrainians in the area, then it's fine. Because we've seen stuff that shouldn't be there already going there. But later on, if your first option succeeds, quote unquote, too well, what do you do with it? Do you go to the end? So, as I said, do you collapse the rear of Kupiansk? If so, fine, great. If it doesn't work, then you need to also cut your losses. And it wouldn't matter, oh my God, you lost 160, 200, 300 kilometers that you used to have in Kharkov. Did you do enough damage? Yes, fine. Then keep going in Donetsk. At the end of the day, the core gains for the Russians right now need to be the four oblasts they have annexed in 2022. And I know I'm going to be a bit contrarian here. I would give a lot more attention to taking the rest of the Kherson Oblast or taking Zaporozhye than going after Kharkov. I know it's a Russian city and all that toss, but at the end of the day, Kharkov has a lot more back game, a lot more backyard, and a lot more possibilities to get reinforced and to get fought for on the Ukrainian side than Zapo. And the whole problem with Zapo is the Dnieper. If you take the eastern Dnieper bank in Zapo city, you have most of the city. In Kharkov, you don't have all this. In Kharkov, the biggest problem is that you are already in depression, and you need to control so many heights. Your perimeter needs to be almost 200 kilometers in order for you to keep Kharkov as it is. Of course, if Kharkov is lost, we've already discussed this, it would be the biggest blow of this war. And then it's done. Honestly, then the Ukrainian mental strength, once Kharkov is gone, is done. You lose your second city, you're going to lose it to basically a bunch of ragtag assholes who have only shovels and vodka and who are going to rape and plunder your city because that's how you describe them. I mean, what's the point? And I know that the NAFO memes are going to come by, 2.5 years to get Kharkov. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Is it in Russian hands? Yes, no, yes. Fine. The only, I mean, idea behind the Russian leadership, military leadership right now would be to make sure that nothing gets spent without a purpose. A lot of losses in Avdiivka maybe were overdone, but Avdiivka was the purpose because it opened the flower towards Ocheretyne, which now threatens both Konstantinovka and Pokrovsk. What are you going to do with Kharkov? Kharkov is an objective on itself, but it's such a huge objective that, as I said, would require you a huge investment. And what I'm seeing right now is not a huge investment. It's simply a opportunistic strike, which works because the Ukrainians are in the shit, and it's going to prolong this stasis within the Ukrainian military because they're going to start wasting stuff that they were keeping for further action. That's my point. I'm going to give the turn to General because he's there for a while. Go on, General.
Hello, everybody. I just joined late, but I got a point where you said that Ukrainians are fighting like before, like in 2022, and maybe it makes sense because they were somehow successful, at least in that area, and one fights the last war, not the one of the future. But I would say also that the Russians probably now are doing their type of war more than what they did in when they intervened,
Yes, historically,
because they took it seriously now. I mean, the last time when they started, it looked like they were like the a shooting target. Just get in and roll in, and then wait for the others to shoot javelins or whatever the hell they shot at them, and it didn't end up good. But this time, at least in Kharkov, I more think that it's a buffer zone question. And since the vicinity of the border, the lines are shorter, as you said. But just wanted to ask you, what is the chance that they are trying to secure maybe the northern flank of the Lugansk and down there, and then when they are done and they are really in the position to menace Konstantinovka and Pokrovsk and whatever, they might do a bigger push down that side. Is there a chance with the bridges and everything, like making logistics line unsustainable? As for Kharkov, I don't think they're going in because if history teaches us something, I think I mean, when they finally took Kharkov in Second World War, it was 250,000 people involved. So the numbers are not simply there. Thank you.
yeah, as I said, to me, it doesn't make sense to call it a great op. To me, what I'm seeing, as I said, it's opportunistic. It's an attrition war. And it is, as you said, a lot more what the Russians wanted to fight as a war in 2022, whereas that Ukrainians would go out piecemeal and be always a bit one step behind. Uh, my biggest problem, once again, is that the Russians do not seem to give that vibe. They want something uh, immediate and big. What they want is indeed a lot more of this attrition war that they have favored when the going has been going tough, has been getting tough. We had it in Chechnya when the first quick op turned into a rather political and military fiasco in 1996. And then they took it slow and they started by choking everything before pacifying up to a point the region. Same for Syria. Everybody was mocking the Russians when they came in with their old planes and shit. But what they did was, as I said, something critical, which was depriving the insurgents of their backfield and also bombing them to the Stone Age. But that's something else. But it took time, like we they came in 2015. Then 2016 we had the Battle of Aleppo, and then there was Palmyra and so on and so on. So I agree completely with you. You are not going to see a Desert Storm style ops with the Russians simply because the conditions for that battle were not in Ukraine in 2022. Ukraine was not landlocked. Ukraine was not deprived of support. Ukraine was not deprived of weapon uh, influxes and supplies and so on. So right now, what the Russians are doing, as you said, is something that is a lot more in their nature. They are taking the fight out to the Ukrainians, but at the same time forcing them to, go with the Zugzwang, which is we do this, you are forced to do that. This inflexive response that was missing for so long in this war, since basically. Um, 2022 in May, June, and July in Lugansk, where the Ukrainians were doing everything one step behind the Russians, then of course turned out to be extremely negative for Kharkov and Kherson. But for the rest, I don't really know, to be honest. I have this. I don't have the feeling that, as you said, the Russians are going to. Um, See the Russians goal right away, because I wasn't expecting it like this. The Kharkov op, honestly, we were waiting for an elephant. Actually, we had a mouse or whatever you want to call it, and this mouse here um, is actually eating the cheese instead of having a big problem when it comes to Russians having logistical issues and so on. Right now, they don't have that. What they have is very simple. Is literally they have this small unit tactics that are going in the offensive. They are meeting small pockets of resistance, mostly non-contact right now, and they are just grinding through. And the Ukrainians are, of course, replying, but as usual with Ukrainians, either it's too late, either the reply itself is what the Russians are expecting in order for them to, enforce the statu quo and point out to the Ukrainians themselves that they have already been bypassed, they are done for. And this is one of those problems I have with them, is that for people who were smart enough to think of the operation in Kharkov in 2022, they are being absolutely retarded when it comes to the operation in 2023 and 2024. And that leads me to believe that there was a estimation of their own forces in 2022, built upon Russian mistakes and Russian.
Maybe more a depletion of Ukrainian resources.
Yeah, that too. But that would mean that your counter in 2023 was a lot worse than you're pretending it was. You cannot be. I mean, one of the things that we need to admit is that it's true that the Russians do not give a lot of losses, but Putin still took the stage and said we've lost 14, 15,000 killed from our mobilized. Is that true? Is that not true? We don't really know. However, we have Zelensky coming out said we have only lost 31,000 killed, and you're like, brother, we have already over 44,000 on paper by your own services. Like those are obituaries you put out, not us. You know what I mean? So we are in this logic where, as much as this lie, this cheeky game of sticking it to the Russians, was cool and shit in 2023, 2024, if your counter was so bad that it depleted your forces to the point when everybody has its tongue, out, then maybe you should actually stop bullshitting people and be honest about it. And in that sense, now I'm starting to maybe better understand what Macaroni was saying, like we're gonna have to put people and forces in 2025 uh, in in Ukraine. If indeed Macron was having the same kind of reports that we are seeing, mirrored in the reality on the ground right now, then holy shit, how bad was the counter for Ukrainians? What are the real losses? Because the other problem that we're having is that when we check the usual suspects, when it comes to counted proven losses for the both sides, God, we are still at a ratio of 1-3. And I understand that proportionally this hits Ukrainians worse because they're the smaller side. But wait a minute, is it really 1-3 now? If for like less than 4 months of counter, you are down to a point where you are going to lose maybe your crown jewel from 2022. The crown jewel of 2022 is not Kherson. It's literally clearing out a huge area next to Kharkov. And then what? What is going to be your next step? Because Kharkov was the masterstroke. They liberated it or that area within 3 months in total. But the part from Balakleya to Kupiansk was really within 19 days. So you did it fast with losses, but not extreme losses. Now, fast forward 2024, you tried to liberate areas in Zaporozhye for 4 months, and you penetrated about 9 to 12 kilometers, depending when you put the line. That means 3 kilometers per month. But in Kharkov, you're about to lose in 1 week 10 kilometers of depth towards Lipsy and maybe down beyond Sirkun and so on. So right now, if you need to go back and do that liberation shenanigans, you are going to lose what you lost in Zaporozhye, not what you lost in Kharkov 22. So at the same time, we can speak about depletion on the Ukrainian side, we can speak about mistakes, we can speak about graft and corruption, but at the end of the day, you have this logic where you are going to fight or you're going to play the people that show up to you with what you have as a team. Like you maybe had the dream team in 2022 and the other guys had hobos playing in front of you, but right now you're the hobos and the other guys are a lot stronger. History will not remember what went wrong. History will remember that you fucking lost Kharkov. So my biggest problem I have right now is, and my biggest concern is that either Russians know what they're doing. It's not something completely out of the blue, and that, as you said, it's not the same Russian army. That it's more of their war. Either indeed, then it's a double negative. Russians are strong and Ukrainians are completely have been completely lying about the readiness in the area, and we have a reverse Kharkov 2022. Of course, that's not exactly true because like in Kharkov, uh, over 8,000 square kilometers were lost. Here we're speaking about 200, 230. So on that aspect, it's not comparable. However, as I said, the type of war we're seeing on both sides completely fits this type of advancement. Gradual until it goes to a point when either it crumbles, either you are forced to take measures, and part of these measures, as we said, is that bringing people who are supposed to keep you safe in other directions, coming to lend you a hand to plug the gaps, and with results that we've already seen in Soledar Bahmut, Avdivka, Ocheretyne, and so on and so on. But in general, let's be honest, even if everything goes fine for the Russians, it will still be 2 to 3,000 square kilometers. It's not small, but as I said initially in the space, you're going to listen to it. It's not that much of a strategic problem for them. The same way as losing Kherson City wasn't a strategic problem for the Russians. It actually even saved them a lot of uh, troops and effort and logistical hassle. But you are the defendant in this case. It's your territory. The onus is on you to take back the land. If you let the Russians establish the same kind of lands they established in Zaporozhye, then you're going to have the same result as in Zaporozhye in 2025 when you're going to try and get some lands back. With the bigger difference is that in Zaporozhye, they had the Azov Sea on their fucking backs, so there was a danger of being cut off and being sent to the sea. In Kharkov, there's the Russian Federation territory in the back. So if the Russians start fortifying a depth of 30, 40, 60 kilometers around Kharkov, and you try to dislodge them, the experience we had in 2023 shows that you are more than likely to actually lose the city as a consequence of your failed counterattack. Maybe that's also the plan. Maybe that's to draw the Ukrainians out until they get clapped, and it's game over for the rest of the war, at least in the political sense of the affair, when we're going to clearly see that without a intervention from abroad, Ukrainians cannot win. And we're slowly getting there, by the way, because the panic that I've seen the last 2 months on the Ukrainian side, I've never seen it, not even 2022. It's doomy, it's gloomy. We see, I mean, I do not see the cause for it as well. I'm not going to lie to you guys. They had worse losses in 2022. The Russians as well, by the way. But so either they're depleted beyond what we knew during the counter, either they have other structural problems, and of course, mobilization is one thing, assets are another thing, ammunition, but the management of those problems is not possible anymore the same way it was during 2022. And it was logical in a sense because you had a lot more voluntary manpowers, people lining up to defend their country and so on. And now you have more people that have fled abroad than people that you have apparently mobilized for the defense of the territory. That also plays a huge role. When you have people that are risking to get drowned in the Tisa instead of enlisting to defend their country, well, what can I say? And once again, the Russians had their own problem in 2022 with also a fuck ton of people that literally went away. Then they started to come back for main reasons, but like I'm not going to point fingers at Ukraine for something the Russians did as well. But the problem is that it hits Ukraine a lot harder than what it hits Russia. So I'm sorry if I was a bit longish, General. If you have anything to ask, or if you want me to narrow down to what you ask properly.
Honestly, the only scenario I see with this troop level on Kharkov is if it happens, I'm going to refer to our history when the Mirdita guys, they were going to help Prince Vid,
Yeah,
in Haji Chamili when he attacked.
yeah,
And they went near Lach, and then somebody told them, the war is lost. So they just got back home without shooting a.
yeah,
So maybe they panic and they go because maybe the defense, as you said, is not what was given by the PR. I don't know. We have to see. Thank you
yeah. Of
though for
course,
the answer.
no problem. That's what I said. We'll have to wait for 2 months to see exactly where this is going. To me, my option is not. This is not for Kharkov itself. This is to get the people, as you said, in a sense, out, and to see how strong it is. I'm not gonna call it a probe because it's way too big for a probe, and it's working quote unquote way too well for a probe. But the reality is that it looks like bait, and hopefully Ukrainians take the bait because so far it has been working perfectly in taking out some of their most prized assets, be that artillery, air defense, and so on. But I agree with you, and I said it from the beginning. If you want to secure a city like Kharkov, you are going to be forced to put a lot more bodies to the line, because this is even smaller than what they used in 2022. It makes no sense. Kremlin, it's your turn, man. Go on, Kremlin.
Yeah, sorry. It was a Twitter bug the first time. Like, I just wanted to kind of like go again through the losses part. I know we've discussed this in terms of human capital because, yeah, I mean, end of the day, you can always build stuff, right? But losing a lot of human capital can have a very negative effect, right, on either sides. On the general morale. And I know we discussed this a lot about what are the actual, especially on the Russian side, right? Because Ukrainian side, in a way, I would say it's kind of like irrelevant because they will be forced to fight until basically they don't have any more resources. But on the Russian side, it's very important to not have that many losses because it can actually drive up number of volunteers joining and things like that. And there's that site out there. What I forgot what was Poteru, I think.
Poterinet.
Yeah, and basically they say it's like 53K dead, confirmed dead. I actually had a look over the data. I take it with a pinch of salt because I saw a lot of posts where it was just the name of a guy, no photo, and no social media link. So I don't know. I'm clinging to think that the losses are somewhere between what the BBC said and what those guys said. I don't know. What do you guys overall think about this?
But Poterinet and the BBC are almost at the same level. The problem with Poterinet, if you go to their chat, is that they claim there are like 20,000 they haven't added. The problem is that they have been yapping about these 20,000 missing since a year now, and we still don't have them. We have a normal growth of what they can find in both social media, but also people who go around. The BBC has a great advantage, had a great advantage, because now it's a lot more complicated for them to go around in cemeteries. But until November 2023, they could go rather freely on a lot of cemeteries, just take pictures, take names, and it was done. When it comes to Poterinet, I tend to believe 99%. Okay, that's a bit harsh, but 95% for sure. There are gonna be some duplicates. There are gonna be some fake announcements. There are gonna be some stuff they misrepresent. So, for instance, when you go to TGs like "Don't Wait for Me" from Ukraine, you got a lot of information about people disappearing and being paused that are passed as killed. I had that multiple times. But in general terms, the known losses are around 53 to 55,000 on the Russian side. And okay, UR losses hasn't updated since a while, and they were stuck at about 44,000 over 2 months ago. So the difference in losses on known losses is almost zero. There is no big chunk of. We have though a difference in missing in action, which the Ukrainians still put at roughly 20,000 military age male. But the thing is that we know that each and every month they get back about 100 to 200 people dead from the Russians. Of course, it's not big, like it's not suddenly you get 200 per month. It's been 26 months. It's not going to be changing fundamentally. It's like you are 100,000 people that are not uh, known to be missing, posed, or dead. But still, this shows once again what I said, that um, on both sides, even if the kill ratio or the losses ratio is the same, this impacts Ukraine the worst. And for that, I already posted multiple articles. now we know that Ukrainians admit at 29 million people within Ukrainian controlled territory. Those 29 million people is what Ukraine can basically base itself upon within the next 10 years, given that either the war ends or not, most of the people that are abroad now for over 2 years are not coming back. One of the biggest problems is that by creating this situation with the consular services and by stripping part of the services for military aged male that are abroad, Ukraine is creating the conditions for these people not to come back, even if the war stops or has a lull, because one, they want to fear about getting incorporated, and two, they are going to fear about getting indicted or fined or whatever for being a wall during the wartime, or the it's not wartime because the Ukrainians have a martial law, but there is no declaration of war against Russia. So in this sense, it doesn't matter what we shall consider as known or unknown. The thing is that if the losses are, as I think, around this threshold of more or less 150,000 irrecoverables on both sides, then for sure now I can understand why the Ukrainians have a huge problem of both uh, enrollment, uh, force uh, generation and regeneration, and also force upkeep and force conservation. Because if indeed we have, as I said, this 150,000 Ukrainians that are irrecoverable, killed, maimed, or prisoners of war, uh, well, it's pretty simple. You got 25 months, 26 months, 2 years, and 2 months. That means that you've lost over 60,000 people, more than 60,000 people per year, completely. You don't get them back. And when you see the yearly uh, regeneration of your demographic pool, Ukrainians are now at 126,000 or less births per year. That means that they are losing to war, not to normal mortality, to war, almost as much men that are born per year. So it's just a lost game on the demographic side. And it's going to be both politically impossible for them to uh, enforce the problem of conscription. It's going to be also impossible for them to replace any kind of loss from now on. If this mobilizing campaign of 500,000 goes on, and they start losing 10,000 a month for all cases, killed, wounded, POWs, then your fourth generation is done within 2 years. You have 2 years of war because you're not going to get them back for any other kind of service in your life. Well, this is one of the problems that I actually am looking at right now. If they indeed have over 60,000 amputees due to war, so basically people who went to war and for a reason or another lost their legs, boy, this is a lot more serious because these guys would need adapted jobs. If they lost their eyes, if they lost their hands, their legs, they would need adapted jobs. Ukraine has already economic problems sustaining itself with quote unquote valid people. Imagine having to do a lot with less than valid people. So at the end, how much losses are there is not that much of a problem. As I said, I'm counting on both sides about at least 150,000 irrecoverables, simply because it's that kind of war. But that impacts the Russians a lot less than the Ukrainians, simply because the resource pool for Ukrainians is already that much shorter, but also because Ukraine still wants to live through its own economy. It's not in a state of um, palliative care, it doesn't survive only by the money it has abroad. It does survive in the sense that it can, go through the day, but still half of the budget the Ukrainian state is using is coming from its own taxation. If that taxation goes to zero, then you will have a completely different vision within Ukraine. But right now, because they want to still keep this polity alive, the more they keep this war, the more they try to make these choices of losing X to gaining Y. For the Russians, in my opinion, it's perfect because they are mortgaging the future, but not 5, 10, 15 years. We're literally speaking mortgaging the rest of the fucking century. And if possible, they are forfeiting the right for Ukraine to actually sustain itself. We're already at 29 million, they recognize, but let's say that the war goes to shit the next 2 years, and you have another exodus of 8, 9 million people on both sides. And suddenly you got 20 million strong Ukraine with a maximum, generating pool of what, 1.5 million, but you cannot let these people go because you still want to have a quote unquote economy, and you still want to have quote unquote a local production for artillery services, all this stuff. So the whole point with losses on the Ukrainian side, in my opinion, or with Russian side, in my opinion, is not to focus on the actual numbers. We should look at the trends, and this in opposing view as I have with Ukrainians for assets and artillery and material. As you say, you can always build them, but the Ukrainians, by having less people, can manipulate less of these assets, can man less of these assets. So for the Ukrainians, the core point is to save their manpower in a way or another. But it's that manpower that gets taken out by, those UMPKs that are quote unquote not accurate. And therefore, we're going to this point where Ukrainians hit 5 Russian guys with 10 FPVs, whereas Russians hit 20 guys with 2 UMPKs. That's the whole balance here. That's the whole problem. And that's why Ukrainians right now are fucking shitting their pants for AD and for Air Force help. They are not asking for tanks. They're asking for artillery, of course. But they're not asking for tanks. They are not asking for APCs except for specific roles. They are happy to roll around with modified Ford 550 with mild steel, where, you can fucking pee upon a Russian senator and that shit's gonna corrode. This is where the Ukrainians are generally. They are right now in survival mode, but they still want to pretend that everything's fine. And this should fucking worry a lot more Westerners than Russia, quote unquote, mobilizing, or Russia buying shit in Iran or in China. They should reflect upon how the Afghan National Army completely caved in and compare it to how the Ukrainians made cave in, because they have the same problem about corruption, lies, and a PR game that has nothing to do with reality. The same, by the way, should be applicable to the Russians. It's true that they are in the winning side right now, but they're also a little bit too bombastic when some announcements are made. And of course, I'm also taking exception at the Russian Ministry of Defense announcements, which are, I'm sorry, they are completely bulks. They are completely bullshit. Come on. I agree that losses are high on the Ukrainian side, but 400 jets, come on, man. If we count unflyable ones, that's how much the Ukrainians had before the war. Anyway, this is just a digression, but that's saying that from what we know, Poteniet is more or less the same character as Mediazona, and there should be between 53 and 55,000 proven Russian CIA. And same thing if UA losses has updated, because I haven't checked it recently. we should also be around the 50 something thousand proven Ukrainian. That's all. A complete equality, which of course, as I said, is a problem because Ukrainians should have 1/3 of the kills or 1/4 of the kills in order for it to make it proportionally relevant. If they both have lost the same thing, well, it's very simple. Half 100,000 dead for a mobilizable pool of 5 million is not half 100,000 dead for a mobilizable pool of 20 million. It's that simple. On one side, you have like 1%, on the other side, you have 0.2%, something like that. And also, that also means that the Russians can also do quality selection in order to have the same kind of forces to oppose Ukrainians. Or they don't. As I said, recently there was this law passed by the Ukrainian leadership over enlisting prisoners. And I said that maximum they could count on 60% of the current 48,000 to 49,000 incarcerated people in Ukraine, which would be but less than 30,000 people. The Ministry of Interior, not I don't know if it was the Ministry of Interior, but anyway, a public figure in Ukraine linked to the Ministry of Interior came out and said we could mobilize 20,000 prisoners for the war. I'm like, okay, 40,000 of the actual number. So at the same time, the Russians had an incarcerated population of over 450,000, and they had mobilized from that incarcerated population over 30,000 people. So there you understand the problem. Even on that level, the Russians can mobilize and have mobilized a lot more than the Ukrainians hope to mobilize as the maximum. So once again, it's not good looking, it's not cool, it's not classy, but this war is going to be fought like it was war in 19th century, 18th century. It's going to be body to body, and it's going to be critical mass against critical mass. And it doesn't matter how much Atacams fly on Crimea, or how much Calibre going to fly on Kiev. At the end of the day, Russian critical mass, aided by its connections and its economy, is going to crush the Ukrainian critical mass, unless, as I said, something drastic happens, which is Western intervention. There is no if, there is no buffs, there's not any kind of change. Or then, as I said, then there's an unknown within the Russian leadership, and it blows up. And some people thought that it was going to go like that with Pigorjit, but it didn't happen. And Pigorjit was neutralized, and then he started playing with grenades on the plane, which was par for course given the character, apparently. So yeah, that's the reply. Sorry if I was a bit longish.
No, so, one more question I still have, because we started seeing, like, obviously on the Ukrainian side there were a lot of quote unquote foreign volunteers that joined. At least in the initial phase, there were all these Reddit idiots that thinking, oh, it's going to be like Call of Duty that got smoked in the end. But then a lot of them we got weeded out, and now we're seeing even on the Western side they're trying to get South Americans or whatever to join, and fight for Ukraine and whatnot. But we've also seen something, a little bit of that on the Russian side. Like we've seen, that famous image of the quote unquote Russian soldier begging the FPV operator. It turns out the guy was Indian. So we also have something on that side. I know that there are some Uzbeks and Tajiks that also, applied to join the SMO. So the reason why I'm asking a lot of this stuff is that a lot of the time on my mind, we live in Europe and we know we have a fucking huge demographic problem. All of the countries over here. It's not just this or that, right? And when you look forward, sorry, not look forward. When you look, kind of in the future, uh, Europe isn't looking good demographically. Obviously, Ukraine is going to be absolute shit. Russia is also going to be hit, and a lot of these European countries. And right now, we really haven't found any solution to how to improve that. other than import people from other places, which in the end is not an actual solution. So I was kind of like wondering, do you guys have any sort of info or guesstimates on how many foreigners are basically on kind of like both sides of this? Because at this point we're seeing, like, especially on the Ukrainian side, we're seeing a lot of trickling down of various non-Ukrainians on the battlefield. And I was actually curious about the Russian side. What do you guys think? Thanks.
Well, this is my opinion, so I'm not going to engage Team or criminal, but I'm based this from the known losses, and from the known losses, uh, given how those guys were used most in Ukraine, I think that we could have reached a maximum of 4,000 foreigners actually fighting on the side of Ukrainian army. And the biggest problem these units have is that they are still kept as auxiliary units, and they have their own fucking structure. And this is a huge problem because, you know, uh, having these units just be as standalones uh, basically lowers their quality and their reach, uh, and also singles them out. So there have been a lot of chosen faggots out there clapped. Georgians have been clapped, but generally, as I said, given the rate of losses, if there are more than 4 or 5 thousand people currently serving in any kind of capacity on the Ukrainian side, I would be baffled, because that would mean that these guys almost never see combat. Right now, there should be like 400 and something confirmed killed. Of course, what we do not know is the guys who got hit in Yavoriv in March 2022, and a couple of other cases where they were targeted by Russian precision strikes. One of those cases we know it was those idiots in Dnipropetrovsk who were Iskander, and then the Spanish guy came out and said two foreigners were lost out of 11 KIA and 40 wounded, included as KIA a notorious right wing asshole on the Ukrainian side. But mostly we don't know those initial losses, and we don't also know is that how these guys participate in battles, because as you remember, we had James Vasquez, who pretended to be a tire operator, and then it was found out the guy was a grafter and literally had never really seen combat and spent most of his time uh, dipping his cheburek into some Tetiana over there, and he lost his family, wife, whatever. I think you all remember that story. Then we had the Nancy's. Then we had all those retards that pushed a lot of people to join the fight. And now what we're seeing most of the time on the Ukrainian side is an attempt to have people who are willing to get into the harm's way in order to mostly create some kind of backbone or QRF force. But we've seen this by time and time again. Um, the biggest problem that the Ukrainians are having is that there is none of the closer countries that are releasing troops. A lot of people talk about Poles trying to help Ukraine, but the biggest casualty ratio right now are the Georgians, and then the Burghers, and the Poles. Sorry, they're completely AWOL. These guys should be there. The Poles, especially the whole area around Kiev and so forth, Poles were literal staples of that area, taking advantage of the cheaper prices and of the quote unquote nightlife in Kiev. I mean, this is what makes me double, triple doubt whatever is being said about Poland and everyone else going to chime in to save Ukraine. These people are not there in the numbers they should be. Instead, a big chunk of the people fighting for Ukrainians are Georgians, people who should not be there either, because 2008 is not that far, and now the Russians are not bound by any kind of peacekeeping operations in Karabakh. So about 2,000 soldiers are freed of their duties. Of course, they have more pressing matters in Ukraine, but the Georgian opposition should rethink about its position. But the Poles, no, they're not there. The Finns that love talking shit, where are these people? All these Skandics that yap and yap and yap and yap on public spaces, they're not there. On top of it, it's normal that a lot of foreigners are not there. Ukrainian military is a shithole. These guys, most of the time, are treated like nothing less but profiteers. We had multiple incidents with the Colombians and Latinos who were saying Ukrainians treat us like garbage. There was this guy who I think returned where in Paraguay or in Chile, who said, "Guys, think it very much because you're gonna get stuck over there." And these guys that don't treat you well if you're not ready or something happens to you. The guy had apparently broken his leg and could not finish his training. They put him on a fucking hospital for 2 weeks and then abandoned him at a train station saying, "Okay, go home." This is also Ukraine, guys. It's not some romantic bullshit like some kind of Red Dawn on the Dnieper. These people are motherfucking hustlers. It's a mafia state. Forget about anything else. I'm not going to say that Russians are saints because they are little brother with big brother, but that's how it is. And in that sense, as I said, I cannot see more than 4,000 foreigners in the spot. If there are more, then what the fuck are they doing? Why are they not fighting? There should be almost everywhere. We should have videos of them like non-stop. Because like theoretically, if there are 4 or 5,000, that's 1% of the Ukrainian military. And given that not everybody goes to assaults, and these people are like cowboys or whatever, they should be in every single video. They're not. Anyway, that was the reply. Sorry for that.
No worry, no, don't worry. No, my only concern is that I think in a lot of these videos where we see some of these like Western equipment hit, I honestly tend to believe those are like foreign operated, right? I don't really see the Ukrainians ever having operated mm, pretty much most of the HIMARS, and in no way the Patriot systems and such. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, but once again, I'm never gonna say something I don't know. I can estimate compared to what we know for sure. But yeah, for the rest, I've learned my lesson from 2022. What we have said since as teamwork criminal has been mostly relevant, and has been based on looking at what's on the ground, what we're seeing. Because this war, let's be honest, uh, is very open compared to anything else. Despite the quote unquote infosec and opsec, the war is extremely open, and also it's at some point, if you are not blinded by um, any side, if you're not a doctrinary, if you try to understand exactly what's going on, you are going to understand where it is going. It's just a matter of speed and just a matter of uh, drastic changes. And as I said, right now, I do not see the Ukrainians uh, turning this around unless something big happens. and that's something big. It's just Western intervention. My biggest problem, I'm going to repeat again, if we are going towards a Western intervention, is that I have no insight on how bad it's going to be for everyone. Because nobody in Europe is ready for a Desert Storm type of deployment. First of all, the resources aren't there. I made a joke with some retired NAFOID who said, like, we got 3,500 tanks. I said, yeah, fine, bro, but you have only 1,400 tanks in active forces, and you deployed in the Gulf 3,000. And that was like one third of the fleet. 3,000 tanks in 1990, which is over twice what the Americans can line up right away. Times change. This is what I said to everyone. This is the problem I have right now. Is that if it's going to be a NATO intervention, then it's not going to exceed 100,000 people. And it's going to take a fuck ton of time to prepare all those guys. And it's going to happen to open a huge vulnerability on the Polish border. Unless they put every one of those guys in Ukraine, which is even worse because it's fair game right on the spot. And this is also one of the things that could be happening with the F-16s is that they are granted safe passage after strikes in Romania. So they strike Crimea, they stay out of the Ukraine airspace and land in Romania. And then we're going to see what the Russians are going to think about that.
Yeah, since we're kind of going into this part about some sort of NATO intervention,
Yeah.
I'm always keeping an eye on shit because these motherfuckers have been doing these exercises since January and up until now. And a couple of days ago, you all know I live in Romania. They did these extensive paratrooper exercises, like 2 to 3,000 people, basically uh, doing parachute drills here. And obviously, I agree with you. They can't uh, get too many people. Like for such an expeditionary um, uh, endeavor, they can't get more than 100,000 people, and that's pretty much almost the number of people that they have around here. It's like 90,000. Part of this steadfast defender, or whatever the fuck
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
called.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So that's my only concern right now, because we keep hearing this bullshit from all these guys. Oh, if Russia breaks the lines, then we have to intervene somehow. So it means that these 90,000 assholes have to go and fight. And honestly, I don't. I'm gonna be a little bit cocky. I'm just gonna disparage the NATO forces. The only thing that I fear, if I would Russia from the NATO side, is the aircraft, the planes, because this is basically with NATO strength. If NATO, if for some reason no aircraft could fly, NATO is absolutely fucked. Like fucked, insanely fucked. This is my only thing. And indeed, we can go in the sort of situation where you're going to see these aircraft strike and then go to Romania or whatever, or Poland, and land there, which is going to put us in this weird kind of thing, because it's, in a way, it's NATO fighting, but we still have this, what if it's we're not hitting NATO territory, but are these guys hitting proper Russian territory? It's a weird thing. It's very in the gray zone, right?
Yes, yes, but that's the problem with this acceptance of the proxy war format on the Russian side. Uh, it, it it does allow the Russians to control the final escalation, if you want, but at the same time, it is going to cause damage. And we are seeing right now the attacks that for the moment are limited to the so-called territorial entity of Ukraine. But what next? Are they going to aim that at Russia proper? Possible. Milerovo, for instance, would be in danger. Other places would be in danger. However, that's what I want to say since the beginning. The problem with that aspect is that once again, it's not going to be ODS. It's not going to be Desert Storm. These people would need to still, by being inserted through the western Ukraine or southwestern Ukraine, they'll still need to travel over 200, 300 kilometers and put staging points and stuff like that. They are going to have a large footprint. They are going to get seen, and we've seen that unless they are going all out with their air force, which means that a lot of aircraft are starting to pop out everywhere, and that's going to be a giveaway. Uh, then you're going to have a complete breakdown in quote unquote dialogue. But that would also mean that they would have to leave people like China in the dark. And this is the biggest problem: is that you can keep this proxy war for as long as you are keeping the war within the Ukrainian territory. But if you start a larger war, which would have to go through Russian territory anyway, because if you have this proxy war, then what about Kaliningrad? What about the Baltics? What about Belarus? What about Poland? This is a complete different level of madness, and that's why, in a sense, the Americans are fine by having piggers dying, because at the end it's not their guys dying. But once you have opened that Pandora box, what happens? And what kind of victory are you going to achieve, or what kind of peace are you going to achieve? Because as sure as hell, what if the Russians weather that kind of assault? You send your 100,000 guys, and within 3 months you're in the shit as much as the Ukrainians. You've lost 20,000 guys, half of your material is unusable, and you need to keep going with this. With the danger zone is that a lot of equipment needs to come from America into a Polish or Danish or German port. What if that thing eats an Iskander or worse? This is the biggest problem that we need to keep into our minds. That's it. Aiden and then Pete. Sorry, Pete. First, Aiden.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question on this Western intervention topic. First off, I'm just curious as to your thoughts, because here in the West, it doesn't really seem like there's any appetite for any war at all, let alone a very serious war with a nuclear superpower. I don't think that domestically any U.S. president would be able to justify that, especially for Ukraine, especially with how desensitized the U.S. population is to the whole, scary Russia. Like a majority of the Republicans don't really believe the whole, Russia thing, because we've played on it so much here. And I'm just curious as to how you think that would play out. And I don't live in Europe, so I don't really I don't know how they are dealing with that idea domestically over there. But also how Europe would respond to their troops, their sons being sent to Ukraine for this weird proxy war that could be negotiated and settled upon. Um, that I guess that was just the majority of my question.
Well, my problem for the U.S., I don't really know how good or bad it will go if suddenly Brandon was to send troops or employ the troops already deployed in any capacity in Europe to help out Ukraine. But for Europe, it's pretty simple. Most of the militaries, especially England, France, and Germany, do not have the capability to add anything meaningful to the debate, except, of course, going full tilt, sending each like 10 to 30,000 people, and having this huge European expeditionary force, about 100,000, of which the biggest threat would be their aviation. Let's not be lying about. However, as I said, then what? You're gonna have another 20,000 Polish people because they're at the border, but the difference is that the Germans and the Poles have made a couple of mistakes. For the Germans, is they are not ready for war, equipment-wise and ammunition-wise. They could be getting ready to at some point, but they're not. And the Poles, they do not have any meaningful reserves because they literally sent most of that shit to Ukraine. The T-72 M1 M1 era were gone. Their Tuardi, most of it has been sent to Ukraine. A couple of Leopards have been sent. The artillery is gone. They, of course, would play with the Air Force card, no problem. But because they're so close to Russia, it's a huge problem for me to see the Poles being able to move around their aviation the same way. Um, but most importantly, you need to have boots on the ground in Ukraine, and you also need to deal with two problems, as I said. First, what you do with Kaliningrad, especially as Poles, and second, what are you doing with the Baltic states? Because the Baltic states are completely locked. They have shitty armies. They can maybe grow up to 60,000 people in total. All three republics. They have a Russian problem within the same polities. Some bigger, up to 20% of ethnic Russians in Estonia. So all these things need to be taken into account. Are you going for an exchange? So as I said, you are going to have a problem with the Baltics, and they're going to have a problem with Kaliningrad and maybe a push within Belarus. But most importantly, outside of these four, who is going to intervene? I do not see the Italians traveling half the fucking Europe to bring troops in there. And as sure as hell, they're not going to cross the Bosphorus Strait. The Turks will simply not allow that. And it's not because the Turks are not in NATO, but the Turks do not want this war to flare up. They are fine with this war keeping like this because they're making money out of it. But if this war flares up, where is the Italians are going to call at port? Romania, uh, Bulgaria.
So if I get you right, it basically sounds like the West is in check right now. Like if you're playing chess, the West is in
Yeah,
check, and they're just moving. They're just sacrificing little bits here and there to keep the war going as long as they can, but without escalating to the point where all the pieces get thrown off the board.
yes, exactly. The biggest problem is that they, to my opinion, and what I'm seeing everybody doing, especially when it comes to the Russian funds, if they were prepared to go balls deep, those funds would have been gone. Never mind how much Euroclear would have to pay as penalties to Russia. They would have been seized. But the Europeans are scared about, first of all, because they need Russia at some point. We're not saying 5, 10, 15 years. They would need Russia for a lot of stuff, be that the market, be that the raw resources, be that a potential if Russia gets pacified and neutered a bit like most of the Eastern countries and becomes up to a certain point subservient to European slash Atlantic goals, then you need that huge buffer with nukes against what is being now considered as the main enemy, which is China. But because of all these small details, we can clearly understand that the Americans do not find in Europe people ready to go and get slashed. The French are may be yapping about European security and all this stuff, but when Xi went to Paris, Macron just spread the legs, and that's what it is. There is no discussion here about the French going at it alone. And Macron saying, "Oh, I'm going to send 5,000 guys, and if they get attacked, there's no need for Article 5. Because what? Those 5,000 guys, if Macron is stupid enough to send them, are going to be a tripwire for sure, so he's going to call for Article 5. But they're going to be slaughtered before everything else happens. And then you're going to have the political domino that I'm saying from the beginning, is that you need only one political entity in Europe to fail within Ukraine for others to start looking around. If France does that and it turns to shit, everybody else is going to think twice. Because the French maybe can send 5,000, but the Dutch cannot afford that kind of troops. The Belgians are not going to discuss it. we are speaking about actual smaller. Europe is getting proportionally smaller. It's a boutique type of armies, most of them, especially Germany. But none in Europe is ready to send a bunch of 200, 300,000 guys as Ukraine would need to fight its war. And if that happens, it would take 6 to 8 months minimum to get everybody together and then have also a unified command. Because this is something that nobody is taking into account. Europe doesn't have a unified command. They don't even have a unified language. So what the fuck are going to talk there? English? French? Italian? And yes, sure, the logistical burden is going to be a bit smaller than Ukraine because they're going to bring their spares and shit. But it's still 2,000 kilometers to go there. This is why the Americans actually failed majorly with their Abrams strikers and Bradleys. They failed to provide that sustainability pool. And they managed to, quote unquote, solve this only November 2023. I'm like, hello, guys, what the fuck? What did you solve? Now you're seeing single Abrams being hunted down by whatever the Russians have, Krasnopols, Lancet, and so on. We see Bradleys that are touted as game changer. Motherfucker, you lost hundreds of them. And you're forced to resupply these guys. But once you think it properly, you're going through about 10%, over 6%, 7% of the produced Bradleys have been sent to Ukraine, allegedly. Of course, we're far away from what America can give, but still, this is the conundrum I was saying from the beginning. You cannot go like this, and you cannot half-ass this shit. And Europe can only but half-ass it with what it has right now. And then the danger is when you have here Borrell or Scholz or other guys saying we need to prepare in 2, 3, 4 years. That makes me a lot more afraid than we're gonna go now alone doing a Odessa defensive whatever. It's the cause that we need to be prepared for 2, 3 years. And of course, the positive thing is that it's mainly bullshit because I do not see any order for Germany, any order for France that would replace the equipment that they would need to do this shenanigans in Ukraine. But for as long as Ukrainians keep this war open, that there is no tactical or strategic defeat for them, of course there is going to be a chance that foreign intervention happens. Sorry if I was long. Pete, up to you, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks for letting me speak. As for what a lot of actually happened, on the Ukrainian side, within the last, 24, 36 hours. And it's because the whole thing, with this Kharkiv, kind of defensive line, which was supposed to be there but isn't there. I mean, there has been a huge blowback because of that, in Ukrainian media and in amongst the Ukrainian population. If you look in the comment section on Ukrainian pro-Ukrainian sites, I mean, they're going apeshit there. And on top of that, Blinken yesterday, kind of being on a stage somewhere in Kiev, singing "Rocking the Free World," I mean,
Yeah.
made them go completely nuts because it basically shows, how little, that the Americans or the West, to that extent, that they don't give a shit, about what the Ukrainians, what's happening to the Ukrainians. So I mean, that's actually good. That's actually good, that this thing is kind of happening because they are kind of waking up to kind of reality. So then I don't know if it was you, Three, who said about the Russians moving the goalposts. I mean, the Russians haven't been moving any goalposts until now. I mean, if it's anybody who's been moving the goalposts, it's the West, because the Russians said don't do that, and the West have been moving the goalpost all along, and the Russians have made perfectly clear, what is going to happen, if any aircraft takes off, from beyond the border of Ukraine. I mean, they have said, if they're being maintained in Poland, this and that, I mean, that country is a fair game. They're a participant in the conflict, and they are fair game. So I think the warning has been pretty strict. Also, like last week, when both the ambassador, the French ambassador, and the British ambassador were called to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Moscow. I mean, that warning was kind of extended, kind of directly, at the ambassadors. So yeah, then there is this there is this one problem, and this is kind of interesting. What is going to happen there is the Suwalki corridor, which kind of feeds Kaliningrad. There is a serious problem there, and I think that whatever happens in Ukraine, this will also be kind of part of the negotiation, because I mean, if the Russians kind of feel threatened there, I mean, they're going to do anything, they're going to take Lithuania and make it the Lithuania corridor, if need be, if you ask me. But yeah, okay, what is your opinion about that?
The problem is that we already knew that Ukrainians were having issues with whole northeast, given that out of every UNPK that we were seeing, at least publicly divulged by the Russians, 20 to 30% was going in Kharkov and all the Kharkov area or Sumy, and nothing was happening. So, in a sense, I said that during the space, it looked a lot like the Russians were doing to the Ukrainians what they did to what the Ukrainians did to them in mid 2022, which was wearing down with HIMARS a lot of dumps, depleting or skinning the Russian forces, and then they went on. As simple as that. They just took out the oxygen of those forces, and it was done. And now the Russians did the same, only instead of firing a couple of 20-kilogram explosive payload per area, they were dropping a couple of 250 or 500-kilogram explosives on the said areas. And instead of doing that within three months, Russians were doing this for 6. And they were doing it in such a way, apparently, which escaped to everyone, including us. I mean, like, we knew it was shit and they were getting stomped in that area, but nobody knew that it was so bad that the Russians, like in one day, just took out what the Ukrainians lost in the last month in Donetsk. Because that's what it is, like 90 square kilometers, boom, one day done. And now they are in center of Volchansk, and they are closing to Lipsy. We don't know exactly when the first push is going to last or going to stop. And once again, of course, the Ukrainians are going to be mad at the situation, because what was sold to them for so long was that the Russians don't dare there because they have lost once, they're not going to come. I've already said that since 2022. Historically, having a fight with a bigger neighbor doesn't mean that you're going to stop this bigger neighbor from coming again. We did that as Albanians with the Ottomans for 30, 40 years. At the end, they still prevailed. And this, I think, is the best way to see how bad the PR has gotten into the mind of the decision-making people in Ukraine. At the same time, they know what the situation is, because time and again they let it slip. They are panicking. They were panicking about the the UNPK threat. Initially, Ignat was saying, "Oh, they're not very accurate. They land more or less where they should be, but it's only 12 planes doing this. It's not that much." Then 2 months after, suddenly it was, well, they're very destructive, not very accurate, but because the radius of destruction is so big, they serve their purpose. And then very recently, from November to April, it was literally the UMPKs are destroying our approaches. Oh, we need something help. We need AD. The whole point of all this, and I was going to repeat it, is that the PR within Ukraine is in this delaying mode for some reason that I ignore. And I understand that it could be political, but in this case, it blew up mostly because the Ukrainians, especially Zelensky, went out on public saying that our Kharkov defenses are the best, the strongest, so it's going to be fine. And maybe it was even right that indeed the first line of defense in Kharkov is around the city, and so the Russians need to move like 10, 20 kilometers to reach it. But so far, it hasn't been the case. Plus, we now are discovering some surprises, as maybe you have already seen, where dragon teeth were supposed to be installed almost everywhere. And I have a wonderful video about this being done in the Kiev region or stuff like that. When they are super proud of what they did and they say like Russians are not going to pass, we see these dragon teeth not even installed, just put on the side of the road and it was done. Nothing happened there. So this is where I wanted to go with this. Is like Ukraine has had a history of amplifying the real problems, of lying openly about how good they were, or how bad also they were, because sometimes they've used uh, deception to hide their real intentions, which is fair. I mean, it's war. But in this case, the biggest problem of Ukraine is that they seem to be at the bottom of the barrel right now, and the only way to save them, from my point of view, is, well, it's very simple. Is the Russians making some very stupid mistake and go after Kharkov with the limited forces they have, or then something else happens and there is a counter somewhere, or is there intervention or whatever you want to do with it. But with the current Ukrainian forces, nothing's gonna happen, and it would require from them to magically have 300,000 people hidden in a cave or a salt mine somewhere, and suddenly these guys pop out and they march towards Moscow. But as you know, there is also always a nuance when it comes to this march toward Moscow. The Leopard march toward Moscow, Abrams march towards Moscow, and probably Ukrainians are going to march towards Moscow. Just the capacity is not going to be the one we fear. So that I hope that replies. Kremlin, your turn, man.
Yeah, regarding the intervention and such like that, because I was while you guys were discussing, I actually checked. Basically, all the active military personnel on all NATO countries in NATO countries in Europe, except Greece and Turkey for obvious reasons. That's why I didn't include them. Is a little bit over 1.2 million men. Like all the basically the official data. How many people work in the what's it called, Ministry of Defense free.
Yes, yes, yes.
So basically, if you let's go for a big shot, like basically out of that number, only 20% would be actually deployable for land and air force, right? Because there's nothing you can do with the navy in this sort of conflict. And a lot of the people that actually work for the Ministry of Defense aren't like proper combat roles. So that leaves
No, they're catalogs. So they're logistics and
exactly,
administration.
exactly. So that leaves us with a little bit over 200K that can be maybe reinforced by 100K or so Americans. So that kind of like leaves us with that number that even NATO says that basically for the eastern flank, all they can provide is 300K at best if there was some sort of war. So that's basically the highest number they can get without doing some stupid shit like a mobilization in Europe, which I kind of doubt anyone wants to do that over fucking Ukraine because you'll probably end up with riots and shit. So
Yes,
yeah.
and actually economically it would be a disaster.
Yeah, exactly. Economically, it's a disaster, first of all. Secondly, it's like, what the fuck are you going to do? Because a lot of the people in Europe don't really feel like getting mobilized and shit. Right? That's not something that people in Europe want. And also, there's a lot of like pro-Russian people in Europe. Maybe not the majority, there are minorities in these countries, but still, like people don't want to do that, and especially in the bigger countries, I would say the more important countries like Germany and such. So that's not okay. Also, there are these anti-war people like in France and whatever, Italy. That wouldn't be a good idea. So yeah, just putting the number out there, more than 300K troops, NATO cannot send in any capacity.
I completely agree with you. My biggest scare is that uh, guys like Macron, who are going to make some kind of YOLO because they think that it would impact, the momentum for the rest of the troops, which, in my opinion, once again, would be disastrous both for the French themselves, but also for everybody who would like to follow the example, because either they arrive at the same time, either they go through this piecemeal approach, but you know that piecemeal approach never works. The Russians are suffering from it. So at some point, the reality is going to be that they're going to try and push on, they're going to fail, they're going to complain as fuck. We're going to have all this discussion about, the European Union or the European military or military industrial complex is not a reality, blah, 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 blah. Nobody wants to do it. But the reality is pretty simple. Of course, that nobody wants to do that shit because Europe has been built by peace. And nobody is ready to go to war for Ukraine, although I still doubt that some people would like to do it, not as much because Ukraine is important, but because they would like Russia to be,
Stick it
shut
to
down.
the Russians. Stick it to the Russians. Yeah.
Exactly. Shut down the peg. But the main problem with that type of logic is that you still need at some point to be normal, quote unquote, and understand what you are trying to do. And is mostly stopping this whole nonsense and trying to get the Russians to stop, taking more Ukrainian. I'm speaking about a European perspective here. I'm not speaking what the Russians should do, but trying to have the Russians to stop their advance and give a price tag for that. That could be purely tactical, just to have them to stop and then reinforce Ukraine for as much as they can in order to extol a larger cost on the Russian side. But generally speaking, as I said, my biggest problem, if I'm Ukrainian, is not that much that I'm in a good shape or in a bad shape. Is far more that I'm in the shittiest shape ever, and my only solution in all this is some guys who are absolutely not ready to die for me, going to fight for me. And it's literally the same way that the people, the kind of military alliance that's helping Ukraine is not cut for Ukraine. The people who are supposed to also help it out with other stuff, so industrial supplies and all stuff, they're also not being great to do that. In a sense, this whole complaint about the arsenal of democracy for Americans not being able to sustain the Ukrainian use of ammunition and so forth, I find it pretty hilarious, because the biggest problem in here is that Europe, that should be the second GDP amount in the global economy, the third actually, because the Chinese are second, is not being able to beat the Italian GDP. I mean, like, what is this thing? Of course, this is once again how Europeans are viewing this, and this is, I think, the source of disbelief that shows the Russians being absolutely in control of this war for factors that we have already discussed. But in the case of the Europeans, it's like, how come Russia, with all its limitation, is not bulking, it's not breaking it, it's not bending it? And this comes from, as I said, the fact that the people who are managing this war on the European side, because the Americans, they don't care, as I say, they just want to see Russians dead and maybe some Ukrainians, because, it will help them make blockbusters 10, 15 years from now. But the reality is that Europe completely failed to understand the consequences of the war it abetted when it led people like Boris Johnson talk and do this shit, it literally condemned Ukraine to this right now. They weren't ready. They were never going to be ready to endure the same kind of losses and problems that the Russians are enduring right now. And if you are not ready to, talk the talk after walk the walk after talking the talk, I'm sorry, you are responsible of the situation. And I would like the Europeans at some point to take responsibility, which is basically accepting either not to fight or not send Ukrainians to fight, or then go full on, like a bit like the Austrian colonel was saying. Either we go balls deep, either we just like pull the Ukrainians out of this bullshit and tell them like, sorry guys, but you will need to accept the unfortunate situation, which is that you have basically lost the war for all purposes, and now it's how much it's going to cost you. But nobody's going to do that, and nobody is trying to get the Ukrainians to accept that for some reason, mostly because it would break not only their promises, but it would break the whole fundamentals of what they sold to the world. Having Russia formalize the annexion of 4 oblasts and more from Ukraine would be recognizing they were important to stop the Russians, and therefore the whole rule of law, all the blah blah that they're trying to sell to everybody else for their own advantage is just bullshit. And of course it sets a precedent, not always positive for a lot of people, because like once that you're going to recognize that you can take one piece of land by force, although the Chinese claims over Taiwan are in a sense recognized by the US with one China policy, suddenly the Chinese have no problems, they will have no qualm to just go over Taiwan. This, of course, is short-sighted, and it's just a kind of automatic translation of the Ukrainian war. But you have other cases like this that might simply pop out. And it's a precedent. That's the most important part. And on top of it, it's going to be completely different from what they had in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, it was awful. It was probably the least, I'd say, dignified end of any kind of occupation. But at the end of the day, the Americans got out of there more or less in one piece. I mean, there was no major discussion over how the Americans lost it. It was K-hold pretty fast. I mean, they left that country by committing one last bunch of war crimes there, killing a family because some fucking retard doesn't understand some guys transporting bottles of water instead of being explosives. U.S. Marines panicking and literally spraying a whole bunch of people with bullets because there was a terrorist attack. I mean, like, all this shit was already painful for the American psyche. But imagine Ukraine, man. You spent 3 fucking years saying that Russia has already lost. And what happens is not only they're not losing, but you're fucking forced to go and play guitar so that Zelensky doesn't shit his pants. This is the fucking situation. We are there now. This is back there with Karzai and Ghani getting, pious lies about how the fucking America is never going to leave them alone, how America is never going to leave Afghanistan, go back into the black hole of theology in 2018 and 2020. And at that time, Trump was already selling their asses out. So that's it. That's the whole point here. And my opinion is that unless the Americans understand how badly they fucked last year by not trying to have a bigger impact, even militarily in the war, it could have been uglier for Ukraine, but that still would have been one shot taken. because you know what they say: you lose every game you don't play. And America didn't play last year. America just put some things in the table and said, okay, this is this. Have at it. And what happened is that, counter was a disaster. Russians counterattacked, and instead of taking the whole situation seriously, America said, "Oh no, nothing's gonna happen. Nothing's gonna come out of this. Russians are losing everything." And to this fucking day, we have people that are making analysis over how Russians are gonna lose the war because they're gonna have less or no tanks by 2026. And I'm like, holy shit, holy actual fuck. Anyway, that was it for today. Thank you very much for being here, guys. If someone wants to intervene a bit more, please. One last point. I maybe you have gone across some claims about OPSEC operation bullshit from NAFWIDS. I don't know what it is about either, but I'm probably gonna find out that is once again the fruit of this bunch of retards trying to make up shit. Hopefully something funny, like Budanov with a Ukrainian flag up his ass in Crimea or stuff like that. Thank you very much, guys. Have a nice day. Bye bye.